You clicked this video because you want to know what was actually living inside those suits. Not just the animatronics are possessed, but who they were, how they got there, and what they were feeling every single night. If you enjoy the video, subscribe and leave a like so we can keep making these. Now let's get into it, starting with the foundations. Remnant isn't a mystical curse. The game showed it's a physical substance born from intense heat and spiritual binding. It's the byproduct of human suffering mixing with metal frames, creating a permanent link that defies normal death. William Afton discovered this substance during his early experiments with corporate machinery. Human consciousness doesn't just float away when a tragedy happens in these restaurants. The iron inside an endoskeleton acts as a natural conductor for intense emotional trauma. When a child dies near a machine, their life force binds to the components. The metal retains their memory, their pain, and their physical essence. Afton built his entire corporate legacy around this scientific framework. He wasn't a chaotic killer operating on random impulses through the buildings. He operated as a researcher who documented how these spirits interacted with metal structures. He realized that specific temperatures could manipulate this substance, allowing him to control the threshold of mortality. This research became the foundation for everything Afton Robotics manufactured. The complex machines weren't designed for simple entertainment. They functioned as tools built to harvest this energy systematically under the guise of family entertainment. He wanted to achieve physical immortality, using the stolen lives of innocent victims to fuel his personal survival. Part 2. How possession works. A soul entering a suit can happen in distinct ways, and the differences shape how the characters behave throughout the timeline. Haunting a machine doesn't require physical contact with the endoskeleton. It occurs when a spirit lingers near an object due to proximity or emotional attachment. The entity influences the plastic shell from the outside, never feeling the crushing gears or the freezing iron components. It's a detached form of presence that preserves a level of independent thought. Being trapped inside a costume is a far more brutal reality. This happens when a body is forced directly into the physical structure, causing the spirit to fuse with the iron skeleton. The victim experiences every mechanical movement as an extension of their own body. They don't have full control over the programming, remaining permanent prisoners to the daily routine of the restaurant. The costume becomes a physical cage that prevents them from resting. Weaponizing a soul takes this fusion to a dangerous extreme. This occurs when programming overrides the child's true consciousness, forcing the entity to comply with corporate commands. The code dictates the behavior, turning a victim into an aggressive hunter against their own will. The spirit stays awake inside the monster, watching its hands commit terrible acts without the ability to stop the motors. It's a total violation of human agency. This distinction matters for every character across the generations of restaurants. It explains why some entities display clear intelligence, while others wander aimlessly through dark hallways. Some search for an ending to their pain. Others strike out in raw anger, and many simply obey a digital directive. Understanding the mechanical state of the soul reveals the true nature of the horror hiding behind the plastic smiles. Part 3. The puppet's role. Charlotte Emily didn't choose to become the anchor for this tragedy. She became the first victim when Afton left her outside the local diner during a storm. Her spirit entered the slender marionette that crawled into the rain to find her body. Because she died outside the physical system of the restaurant, she retained her full memory and identity. She didn't experience the confusion that clouded the minds of the later victims. This clarity made her the natural leader of the spirits. She looked at the other children and recognized their helpless state after the crimes occurred. They wandered the corridors without realizing they were dead, trapped in a loop of panic. Charlotte became the guiding presence that gave them a direction inside the building. She understood the machinery because her father built it, allowing her to navigate the system easily. Her gift of life wasn't a merciful rescue. It was a desperate act that bound the children to the heavy costumes to prevent them from fading away. She pressed the character masks onto their faces, forcing their consciousness to merge with the endoskeleton frames. It gave them the physical strength to push back against their killer, but it also locked them into a perpetual nightmare. They became monsters to survive their own demise. Nothing that happens in the subsequent years makes sense without her intervention. She created the force that eventually chased Afton into the hidden room. She managed the anger of the spirits, keeping them focused on their target for decades. Her choices transformed a series of hidden crimes into an organized resistance. She accepted the burden of the mask, so no other child would have to fight the darkness alone. Part 4. Springlock Suits. Springlock suits represented a dangerous innovation in engineering. Henry designed these performers to serve two roles for the business. An entertainer could wear the suit as a standard costume, or the staff could retract the internal parts to let the machine dance independently on the platform. It was a brilliant concept that saved money, but introduced an element of risk into the daily operations. The design utilized small steel clips to lock the sharp mechanisms against the outer lining. These locks remained under intense tension when a human stood inside the frame. An employee walked around the dining room with hundreds of spring-loaded gears positioned inches from their skin. It required perfect posture to keep the parts from breaking loose. A single mistake could turn the festive outfit into a mechanical trap. The fatal flaw was their extreme sensitivity to moisture and sudden shifts in balance. A drop of sweat or a deep breath could cause the mechanisms to lose their grip. If the locks failed, the compressed frame snapped back into its original shape instantly. The human inside was pierced by the iron skeleton within seconds. The company knew about these incidents, but chose to hide the reports to protect their reputation. This mechanism claimed William Afton when the spirits cornered him in the abandoned building. He thought the old rabbit suit would shield him from the ghosts of his victims. Instead, the damp atmosphere triggered a mass failure of the clips, crushing him against the iron structure. The killer became a permanent resident of the machine he used for his crimes, trapped in a state of living decay. Fredbear stood as the original icon of the family brand. Henry constructed the large bear to serve as the premier attraction at the first venue. He was a simple character with a heavy frame, but he represented a massive step forward for the entertainment industry. Parents brought their children specifically to see the golden character perform his musical routines during the weekend rush. The machine relied on the dual system to alternate between his duties. When operating on the main stage, the internal motors drove his heavy jaw in a rhythmic loop. He sang songs to the families who gathered near the wooden platform, completely unaware of the pressure building inside his casing. The system worked perfectly for years, establishing a foundation for a lucrative franchise. The mechanical jaws possessed immense power. The hydraulic systems required incredible force to move the plastic mouth while the audio tracks played. Henry didn't include safety sensors to detect pressure changes, believing the stage barriers would keep the guests at a safe distance. The machine simply followed its programming. moving its mouth with relentless momentum regardless of what stood in its path. A single birthday party changed the trajectory of the business forever. Fredbear became a symbol of terror when a group of teenagers ignored the safety rules. The machine didn't malfunction. It simply continued its routine when an obstruction entered the mechanism. The event forced the closure of the diner, leaving the golden bear to rot in a dark room, while the company attempted to rebuild its public image. The tragedy occurred because of relentless bullying. A group of older teenagers targeted the weeping boy during his brother's celebration. They carried him toward the main stage, ignoring his screams as they lifted him closer to the performer. They thought it was a harmless joke to shove his head directly into the open mouth of the golden bear. The child's tears provided the moisture that triggered the delicate clips inside the head. The springlock slipped, releasing the compressed mechanisms with absolute force. The heavy jaw snapped shut instantly, crushing the boy's skull before anyone could pull him away. The laughter stopped immediately as the crowd realized the machine wouldn't open its mouth. He survived the initial impact, spending 4 days on life support in a quiet hospital. He lay in darkness while his fading mind processed the trauma of the event. A plush bear sat by his bed, speaking to him in a voice that promised to fix what was broken. The conversation suggested that his consciousness was already detaching from his physical body. When his heartbeat stopped, his soul didn't leave the restaurant system. It entered the golden suit, creating a presence that defied the standard rules of possession. He became a spirit without a stable physical form, trapped inside an empty shell that couldn't stand on its own. He remained a silent witness to the expansion of the company that destroyed him. Part 7. Spring Bonnie before the murders. Spring Bonnie functioned as the secondary performer at the original diner. The yellow rabbit stood next to Fredbear, strumming a plastic guitar for the guests. Like its partner, the suit featured the dual mechanism that allowed a human actor to step inside the torso. It was a popular character that drew crowds during the afternoon shows. William Afton chose this specific character as his personal tool for his hidden activities. He realized that children trusted the smiling rabbit completely, making it the perfect disguise to avoid suspicion. He spent hours practicing with the suit, learning the precise movements required to keep the iron clips from slipping while he walked through the corridors. The costume served as both a festive entertainer and a silent weapon. Afton moved through the dining room, waving to families before selecting his targets near the game area. The yellow shell concealed his expressions, allowing him to lure children toward the back rooms without alerting the staff. He transformed a cheerful character into a symbol of absolute danger. A single afternoon changed the rabbit from a simple prop into an object of pure dread. Afton used the suit to commit the first series of disappearances inside the building. The costume wasn't just plastic and fabric anymore. It became the physical manifestation of the killer's presence. The company eventually retired the suit to storage, but its role in the story was far from finished. Part 8. The Springtrap Transformation. Years after the final closure, Afton returned to the ruined pizzeria to destroy the evidence of his past crimes. He dismantled the classic machines one by one, thinking he could bury the past forever. He didn't expect the spirits of the children to manifest from the broken parts, blocking the exit to the safe room. Panic drove him toward the old rabbit suit, resting on a metal stand in the corner. He threw the heavy costume onto his body, believing the familiar disguise would give him protection against the ghosts. He stood up and laughed at the spirits. thinking he outsmarted them once again. His arrogance blinded him to the condition of the room. The ceiling suffered from severe leaks, and rainwater dripped directly onto his metal shoulders. The vibration of his laughter shook the delicate clips holding the mechanisms back. The spring locks fired simultaneously, driving iron bars into his flesh and breaking his ribs. The suit collapsed inward with absolute force, trapping him inside the frame. The living man was crushed into the mechanical skeleton over several agonizing minutes. His blood fouled the gears, fusing his remains with the costume he used for murder. The spirits vanished as the screaming stopped, leaving a broken corpse to sit in the dark. He became a prisoner of his own design, sealed inside a room that the company quickly walled over. Part 9. 30 Years in the Wall. Management discovered the gruesome scene inside the safe room and chose to hide the truth to protect their interests. They constructed a false wall over the entrance, erasing the room from the official blueprints. For 30 years, the rabbit suit sat in total isolation, surrounded by dust and forgotten machinery. The world moved on from the tragedy. Afton didn't perish in the traditional sense during those long decades. His absolute malice and the presence of Remnant forced his soul to stay bound to the rotting flesh. He endured 30 years of silence, his consciousness slowly merging with the rusted wires and green mold. He became a conscious entity trapped inside a decaying cage. He developed a new form of existence during his time behind the wall. The human tissue decayed completely, leaving a skeletal jaw behind the plastic mask. He learned to force the mechanical legs to move, turning the ruined costume into a functional body driven by pure anger. He waited in the dark, listening to the sounds of the changing world outside. A horror attraction uncovered the hidden space while searching the old building for authentic relics. They dragged the heavy machine into the light, naming it Springtrap for their promotional displays. They didn't realize they released an active killer who retained his memories and his desire to cause harm. His first life ended, but his second performance was about to begin. Section 2. The Missing Children and the Classic Animatronics. Part 10. The 5 Children. The 5 children were ordinary guests who came to the restaurant for a weekend celebration. Gabriel, Fritz, Susie, Jeremy, and Cassidy didn't realize they were being watched as they played near the stage. They shared a simple love for the characters, completely unaware of the man tracking their movements from the shadows. Afton watched them from the edge of the dining room, selecting his targets during the busiest hours of the afternoon. He donned the yellow rabbit suit, using a playful voice to trick them into leaving their families. He promised them a private viewing of a special character behind the main stage, exploiting their innocence. They followed him into the dark storage room, expecting a surprise. Instead, the door locked behind them, and Afton ended their lives before anyone noticed their absence from the tables. He stuffed their physical bodies inside the spare suits to conceal his actions from the police. The restaurant stayed open, while the children remained hidden inside the performers. The puppet entered the room immediately after the killer departed. She recognized the spirits lingering near their remains, cold and confused by the sudden change. She didn't offer a peaceful exit. She guided each soul into a specific machine. Her actions gave them a physical anchor, transforming their confusion into a collective desire for absolute justice. Part 11. Freddy Fazbear. Gabriel became the entity inside the main bear suit, and the transition required his young mind to adapt to a heavy mechanical frame. He didn't understand the iron gears pressing against his consciousness, but he recognized the weight of his new body. He occupied the central character of the restaurant, which forced him into the spotlight every single day. He had to stand still while families ate dinner, his spirit trapped behind a plastic gaze that couldn't blink. This forced routine shaped how he interacted with the world around him, turning his confusion into a focused baseline of behavior. His prominent position on the wooden stage made him the natural leader of the trapped group. The other children looked to him for a sense of order during the night hours when the customers left the building. He assumed a protective role, organizing their paths through the dining room to ensure they acted with coordination. He wasn't a mindless animal. He moved with a deliberate strategy that made him the most dangerous presence for the night guard. He watched the security cameras, learning where the blind spots sat in the eastern corridor. His possession heavily influenced his hunting patterns when the building went dark. Freddy stayed in the deepest shadows, avoiding direct camera views whenever possible. He didn't run down the hallways like the others, preferring a slow approach that minimized his visibility. The guard could only track him by watching for the silver reflection of his eyes in the dark corners of the rooms. This cautious behavior revealed a calculating intelligence that separated him from a simple mechanical malfunction. He understood the rules of the building perfectly. He maintained a strange connection to his original programming that he used to his advantage. During his approach, he often played his signature music box tune from the kitchen area. This audio loop wasn't an accident. It was a psychological tactic that announced his presence while hiding his exact position. The blending of his spiritual energy with the machine's software allowed him to manipulate the audio systems. He turned a harmless childhood song into a signal of impending danger for anyone sitting in the office. The black microphone and top hat took on a tragic meaning for the spirit over the years. These items weren't removable toys. They were permanent components fixed to his plastic hands. They represented the corporate identity that replaced his real name and his stolen life. Gabriel couldn't set the microphone down or step off the platform during the day. He watched thousands of normal children enjoy their lives while he remained frozen in a performance that never ended. The props became the physical markers of his permanent imprisonment. When power failed in the office, Freddy became the final judge for the guard. He appeared at the left door, his face illuminated by a flickering light, while his music played its final bars. This moment showed the complete union of the child's anger and the machine's purpose. He waited for the music to stop before entering the room, adhering to a twisted sense of showmanship. Gabriel didn't offer mercy, seeing an adult who wore the same uniform as the man who lured him away. Or Part 12, Bonnie the Rabbit. Fritz entered the rabbit costume, bringing a chaotic energy to the mechanism that differed from the cautious approach of the bear. The fusion created an aggressive entity that didn't care about stealth or patience. He wanted immediate confrontation with the adults who occupied the security office. This intense anger explained why Bonnie was always the first performer to leave the stage when midnight arrived. He didn't wait for a coordinated plan, stepping into the dining room seconds after the shift began. The rabbit's baseline programming possessed rapid navigation paths through the western side of the building. This technical layout blended perfectly with the child's frantic desire for swift vengeance. He bypassed intermediate storage areas, appearing at the office door with speed that caught guards off guard. He didn't creep through the shadows. He stood directly beneath the bright hallway lights, demanding to be seen. His presence was an open challenge to the safety of the office, forcing the guard to react instantly. He stared through the security window with fixed eyes, twitching violently as the mechanical joint struggled with his spiritual energy. This twitching wasn't a code error. It was the physical reaction of a child's rage warping the plastic frame. He didn't just wait for an opening. He actively jammed the door buttons and disabled the light fixtures to ensure his target couldn't escape. His behavior was relentless, a constant assault on the resources of the office that kept the guard in a state of panic. This constant activity caused his mechanical joints to wear down much faster than the other characters. He threw his weight against solid barriers and heavy doors during his nightly hunts, causing fractures in his outer casing. His reckless behavior explained why his suit suffered the most damage when the company attempted to remodel the characters. They stripped his parts for spares, leaving his body in a state of ruin that reflected the violence of his internal state. He became a monster shaped by his own aggression. By the time the second restaurant opened, the rabbit lacked a face and a left arm. The company left him in the dark corners of the parts room, believing he was nothing more than a source of copper wire. The missing face became the ultimate expression of his absolute rage. The spirit used the empty void of his head to terrify his targets, staring through the cameras with exposed wires and glowing red pins. He didn't need a smile to convey his hatred for the company. He moved through the vents of the new location with the same frantic energy he displayed in the original building. He didn't let his physical damage slow his movements, crawling through the narrow pipes to reach the new guard. The lack of a face made his appearance even more jarring, a walking corpse of iron and fabric that refused to stay retired. Fritz carried his anger across every venue, remaining a symbol of the violence that started it all. Part 13. Chica the Chicken. Susie was the first child that Afton targeted during the missing children incident, making her story a foundational piece of the tragedy. The game showed she was vulnerable because she recently lost her dog in an accident outside her home. She stood alone in the game area, weeping for her pet, while the rest of the restaurant enjoyed the food. She felt isolated in the crowd, which made her the perfect mark for a predator looking for an opening. Afton approached her while wearing the yellow rabbit costume, using a gentle voice to override her natural caution. He claimed he had information about her lost animal, telling her that the dog wasn't truly dead. He stated the pet sat in the back room waiting for her to find it, using her grief as a tool to gain her trust. Susie wanted to believe the lie, wiping away her tears as she looked up at the smiling character. The mini-games revealed the exact moment she chose to follow the stranger into the restricted area. She didn't see the danger hiding behind the fabric mask, focusing entirely on the hope of seeing her pet again. She walked down the narrow hallway, leaving the safety of the public dining room behind for a false promise. That choice ended her life, leaving her body hidden inside the heavy chicken suit in the storage room. Her profound sorrow followed her into the machine, shaping how Chica moved through the building at night. She didn't display the rapid speed of Bonnie or the calculated stealth of Freddy. She moved with a heavy cadence. She spent long periods wandering through the kitchen, knocking over metal pans and disturbing the utensils. The clattering sounds from the dark kitchen became a regular feature of her nightly routine, signaling her presence to the office. She frequently emerged from the restroom corridor, staring into the security cameras with a wide beak. The mechanical jaw stayed locked in an open position, revealing the double row of iron teeth inside the throat. It looked like a permanent scream of complete shock that never faded. The spirit couldn't process the betrayal she experienced, forcing the machine to reenact her final moments of terror over and over again. Her nightly groans weren't software errors. They were the vocal expressions of a child who stayed sad forever inside a plastic shell. She kept returning to the areas where families gathered, looking for the life that was taken from her. Her presence in the right doorway was a silent reminder of the cost of Afton's actions. Susie remained trapped in her grief, a small girl hidden behind a bib that promised a party that never arrived. Fritz shared a connection to the Fox machine that occupied the secondary stage on the edge of the dining room. This character didn't perform with the main band, sitting behind a purple curtain away from the primary lights. This physical isolation affected how the spirit behaved when the night shift began. He didn't view himself as part of the group, developing an independent style of hunting that required constant monitoring from the guard. Pirates Cove was designed as a unique attraction for children who preferred adventure stories over traditional animal songs. It featured a small stage bordered by star-patterned fabrics that kept the character hidden between shows. The concept was highly popular during the early years, but the company closed the attraction abruptly without giving a clear explanation to the public. They left the character behind the curtain, letting the attraction become a storage area for broken props. Management kept Foxy hidden because his mechanical systems suffered from severe coordination issues that made him a liability. His rapid movements were too dangerous around young children, creating a risk of physical injury during a performance. The company didn't want to invest in expensive repairs, choosing to list the character as out of order to avoid corporate responsibility. They thought the curtain would keep the problem away from the customers. The out-of-order sign hid a decaying machine that was actively rotting on its iron frame. The red fabric peeled away from his torso, exposing the silver endoskeleton and loose wires underneath his chest. The teeth were sharp and exposed, lacking the soft plastic coating found on the main performers. The spirit inside had to watch the restaurant through the cracks in the curtain, listening to the music of a band he couldn't join. At night, the spirit expressed this forced confinement through sudden bursts of incredible speed. He didn't wander through the intermediate rooms, sprinting down the western hallway in a direct line toward the office. He wanted to break out of his small enclosure immediately, turning his movement into a test of the guard's reflexes. The sound of his heavy footsteps running down the corridor was the only warning the guard received before the door had to be shut. He banged on the iron door with his metal hook, draining the office power supply before retreating to his stage. This aggressive behavior showed a desperate need to escape the restrictions of his setting, striking out at the first adult he could find. He remained an outsider within the group, driven by a frantic energy that never settled. Fritz turned the broken entertainer into a rapid weapon that refused to be forgotten behind the curtain. Cassidy occupied the Golden Bear costume, but her situation differed completely from the other 4 missing children. She wasn't stuffed into a functional endoskeleton frame during the initial incident. She entered a spare costume that lacked the necessary internal mechanisms to stand upright or walk through the hallways. This physical limitation forced her to manifest as a ghostly entity rather than a physical machine operating on tracks. She didn't trigger the door sensors or appear on the standard camera paths like Freddy or Bonnie. She materialized out of thin air, slouched on the floor of the office in a posture that mirrored an empty shell. Her spectral nature allowed her to bypass every physical defense the security guard possessed, ignoring locked doors completely. Her presence brought a freezing atmosphere into the room, causing the guard's vision to distort with horrific images. looking directly at her slouched form for too long caused the entire security system to experience a catastrophic failure. Her giant face filled the monitors, crashing the camera software and forcing the system to shut down entirely. She possessed a spiritual power that far exceeded the other victims, indicating a level of anger that kept her attached to the living world without a physical conductor. She was a glitch in the reality of the restaurant. Her advanced intelligence was driven by a calculated desire for absolute vengeance against her killer. The other spirits wanted to stop the night guard because they confused his uniform with the man who harmed them. Cassidy knew exactly who William Afton was, and she didn't care about a simple escape or a peaceful resolution. She wanted to make him pay for every life he destroyed, developing a plan that extended far beyond the walls of the pizzeria. Vengeful focus allowed her to sustain a personal hell for Afton, long after his physical body perished in the fires. She refused to let his soul pass into the void, creating a dream landscape where he was hunted by the characters he created. She became the overseer of his torment, adjusting the difficulty of his survival to ensure he never found a moment of rest. She turned his own creations into instruments of eternal punishment. The games showed her persistence through the image of a golden bear twitching in the darkness as the credits rolled. She didn't accept the peace offered by the other children. Choosing to stay behind to maintain her hold on the killer, Cassidy remained the most formidable entity in the franchise. A child whose absolute refusal to forgive turned her into a permanent jailer for the monster who started the nightmare. The closure of the first restaurant left the company with a financial problem and contaminated machines. Management didn't destroy the characters because they still saw value in the hardware. They chose to dismantle the quartet, pulling apart the outer coverings to prepare them for an upcoming relocation. Picture the mechanics working in the dark, handling components that carried a distinct odor they couldn't identify. They thought they were just handling old metal, completely unaware of the spiritual connection bound to the copper wiring. The company attempted a retrofitting process to upgrade the technology for their next venture. Technicians installed facial recognition software into the old frames, trying to force modern systems onto mechanisms that weren't built for them. The modifications ruined the appeal of the original models, leaving them broken and exposed. When the budget ran out, the project stopped abruptly, leaving the characters half-finished. The team simply dropped the units into a back storage area, walking away from the mess. The physical bodies suffered severe damage during this abandonment, but the procedure didn't touch the souls inside the metal. The children's spirits didn't fade when the fabric coverings were ripped away from their faces. The trauma of the dismantling process actually intensified their anger, anchoring them deeper into the internal frameworks. They stayed awake through the entire procedure, experiencing the mechanical changes as a continuation of their initial torment. The physical transition didn't alter their memories or their focus on the uniform. The parts and service room became a quiet prison, where the withered models sat for months. They stayed slouched against the grey walls, surrounded by spare limbs, loose wires, and unused monitors. Imagine being a night watchman looking through the camera feed and seeing those giant shapes resting in the dark. The room lacked proper ventilation, allowing the lingering smell to settle into the concrete floor. The company treated the space as a junk pile, ignoring the fact that the contents were actively watching the door. The characters didn't remain inactive despite their lack of maintenance. When midnight arrived, the broken mechanisms twitched into motion, driven by the spirits that refused to let the hardware rest. Bonnie crawled through the building without his face, his exposed wires sparking against the floor tiles as he searched for the office. Chica forced her broken jaw open, navigating the hallways with stiff movements that bypassed the new safety systems. Their physical limitations didn't reduce their threat, making them more aggressive than the operational models on the main stage. The presence of these ruined frames in the building proved that Fazbear Entertainment couldn't fix their past mistakes with a simple redesign. The company left the real problem in a back room, while pretending everything was fine out in the bright dining area. The withered characters served as a warning for anyone who took the security job. The old souls were still there, waiting in the dark corner of the facility, completely unchanged by the passage of time or the corporate choices of the executives. Doc Break Time 2/Section 3, the toy animatronics AN The Five Nights at Freddy's 2 Location Part 17. The toy animatronics The New Restaurant represented a corporate effort to wash away the stains of the previous disappearances. The company designed the toy animatronics to replace the old characters completely, using a clean design that looks safe for families. These new models featured smooth plastic shells, bright cheeks, and a friendly appearance that didn't remind anyone of the hidden rooms. Management spent millions on these units, marketing them as the future of family entertainment. They wanted to prove that the brand was entirely safe for the community. The defining feature of the toy characters was their connection to a local database. The executives installed advanced security systems directly into their processors, allowing the machines to scan faces across the dining room. If an individual matched a profile, the character would immediately signal the staff to prevent an incident. The company believed this automated defense would make another disappearance impossible. They put their total trust in the digital code, assuming a machine could identify a threat before anything happened. The game suggested that these new models didn't contain the souls of murdered children during their initial weeks. They lacked the biological evidence and the spiritual history that defined the withered frames in the back room. They were clean machines running on expensive code, moving across the tile floors, because their programming told them to interact with the guests. The absence of a trapped spirit should have made them harmless. But the reality inside the building quickly proved otherwise as the week progressed. The characters began to behave strangely around adults within the first few days of operation. They stared at parents with an unblinking gaze, freezing in place whenever an older guest approached the stage area. The facial recognition software started to malfunction, misinterpreting normal expressions as potential threats. The company blamed the issue on a software glitch, telling the night watchman that the units were just adapting to the local crowds. They didn't realize that the machinery was interacting with a different force inside the building. The night shift revealed that the toy models were actively trying to reach the security office. They slipped off their stages after midnight, navigating the hallways with silent precision to corner the guard. They didn't move with the chaotic rage of the old characters, following a clean routine that brought them directly to the open doorway. The lack of a physical soul didn't stop them from trying to kill the employee. They viewed the guard as a criminal element because their systems were reacting to the dark history of the company. The absolute failure of the toy line proved that technology couldn't solve a spiritual problem. The advanced programming became corrupted by the intense agony that already saturated the facility. The machines absorbed the negative energy of the location, turning their safety protocols into an aggressive hunting routine. The shiny plastic shells became just another set of monsters, proving that any machine built under the Fazbear name would eventually turn on the people it was designed to protect. Part 18. The marionette at the prize counter, the puppet, occupied a unique position inside the new restaurant, away from the main stage performers. The slender character sat inside a giant gift box at the prize counter, completely hidden from view during the day. Charlotte Emily inhabited this ceramic mask, bringing a level of human intelligence that the other characters lacked entirely. She didn't follow the basic programming of the facility, operating with a specific purpose that kept her focused on the surrounding rooms. She watched the families from her hidden spot, waiting for the building to empty out. Her nightly routine didn't involve standard wandering through the main corridors. She stayed inside her box as long as the music box played its continuous melody from the security desk. The wind-up mechanism was the only tool that kept her spirit contained within the small area. The games never fully explained why the music held such power over her, but it functioned as a mechanical barrier that pacified her consciousness. The night guard had to monitor the remote signal constantly, twisting the dial to keep the song running through the speakers. Picture what it felt like to sit in that office and watch that little white circle drain away on the monitor screen. If the music box ran out of power, the song stopped instantly and the lid of the gift box swung open. Charlotte climbed out of her enclosure, entering the hallways with a fluid motion that ignored the standard spatial rules. Once she left the prize counter, the guard couldn't stop her approach. No door or flashlight could alter her path, making her arrival a mathematical certainty for the employee. She moved through the darkness with a quiet determination, her long limbs pulling her toward the security desk. The other animatronics reacted to her presence, shifting their patterns whenever she entered a room. She was the one who managed the spiritual energy of the building, keeping the other souls tethered to their physical targets. Her approach wasn't driven by a software malfunction or a broken database link. It was an act of absolute control from a spirit that understood exactly what she was doing. The night Jeremy Fitzgerald let the music stop was the moment the fragile peace of the location shattered completely. Charlotte didn't just attack the guard, she used the opportunity to alter the balance of power inside the facility. She guided the Withered characters out of their storage area, directing their attention toward the uniform. The music box wasn't just a safety tool for the guard, it was the only thing preventing a coordinated assault on the entire corporate structure. When she reached the office, she didn't just jump scare the guard, she stared into his eyes with a gaze that carried decades of sorrow. Her face stayed completely still, but her actions spoke of an ancient grudge against the uniform. She represented the first failure of protection in the timeline, and she wasn't going to let another adult ignore the danger hiding in the corners. The puppet remained the true architect of the resistance, an entity that couldn't be controlled by a simple corporate script. Part 19, Mangle, the toy version of Foxy, suffered a unique fate that transformed the character into a physical nightmare. The company originally placed the white and pink fox in the Kids' Cove area, intending it to be a high-end attraction for toddlers. The design proved too delicate for the young guests, who regularly pulled the plastic casing apart during the morning shifts. The staff grew tired of reassembling the complex mechanism every evening, eventually leaving the parts scattered across the floor tiles as an interactive puzzle. This repeated dismantling process caused total failure within the internal operating systems. The wires became tangled, the joints jammed, and the central processor began to mix its audio tracks with local police frequencies. The character became a mess of limbs and exposed iron, earning the nickname Mangle from the local employees. The company didn't care about the damage, letting the guests continue to abuse the hardware because it kept the children occupied during the busy hours. The mechanical distortion had a profound effect on the consciousness living inside the broken frame. The entity didn't walk on two legs, crawling across the walls and ceilings like an iron spider. The sound of its approach was unmistakable, accompanied by a loud blast of static radio static that echoed through the ventilation pipes. Imagine sitting in the quiet office and hearing that broken signal getting closer from above your head, knowing you couldn't easily block its entry point. The radio transmission wasn't a random error, it was a broken distress call that the machine broadcasted continuously. The static carried fragments of audio data that suggested the character was trying to communicate its internal state to the outside world. The spirit inside the white mask used the broken speakers to express the confusion of its existence. It stayed suspended in a state of physical ruin, forced to exist as a toy that was meant to be broken. The character left a disturbing presence on the ceiling of the parts and service room during its nightly excursions. It slithered through the upper areas of the facility, looking down at the other animatronics with a twitching head. Its extra endoskeleton head snapped its jaws in the dark, acting with an independent motion that suggested multiple currents of energy were fighting for control inside the wires. It was a complete perversion of the original design, driven by a desperate need to find missing pieces. Mangle's behavior culminated in a violent incident that proved how dangerous the broken model had become for the restaurant. The machine dropped from the ceiling during a daytime party, its sharp teeth finding an adult target before the staff could intervene. The event showed that the children's destruction had unlocked a real monster inside the plastic frame. The company couldn't control the creation they abandoned on the floor, leaving a broken spider to haunt the memory of the location. Break Time 2/Part 20 Balloon Boy. Balloon Boy stood out as the only human-styled character in the new lineup, lacking the animal traits of his stage companions. The small statue stood near the game area, holding a plastic prop and a sign that welcomed families to the restaurant. He didn't have moving jaws or sharp teeth, presenting zero physical threat to the children who walked past his position. The guests ignored him because he didn't perform a musical routine, remaining a stationary prop that seemed entirely harmless. The night shift revealed that this harmless appearance hid the most dangerous utility in the entire building. The character moved through the hallways with a slow cadence, his plastic shoes clicking against the hard floors as he approached the office. He didn't attack the guard directly when he reached the blind spot, choosing to stand inside the left doorway with a continuous laugh. That audio track wasn't a glitch. It was a signal that marked the complete failure of the guard's defenses. His presence in the room instantly disabled the battery power for the flashlight mechanism. He pulled the internal wires out of the console, leaving the guard completely blind in the dark hallway. Picture what it felt like to click that button over and over and realize the beam wasn't coming back on. Without the light, the watchman couldn't deter the other animatronics, especially the withered fox waiting at the end of the corridor. Balloon Boy didn't need teeth to end your shift. He functioned as a strategic coordinator for the other monsters, using his high-pitched voice to draw their attention toward your desk. Every time he spoke into the microphone, his audio cues pulled the other characters closer to his position. He was a beacon in the dark, guiding the collective anger of the building toward a single point. The small statue became an object of pure frustration for anyone trying to survive until 6 in the morning. The company never explained why they built a character with a specific ability to disable electronic equipment. The design choices suggested a level of corporate incompetence that bordered on deliberate sabotage for the employees. They put a machine in the room that actively assisted the monsters, framing it as a simple toy for the children. The spirit inside the small frame took full advantage of this layout, turning a prop into an effective weapon. Balloon Boy proved that the horror of the franchise didn't always come from giant jaws or bloody history. Sometimes the biggest threat was a small machine that took away your only tool for survival while laughing at your panic. He stayed in that doorway until the final hours, a silent partner to the violence that happened every night in the dark. He was the piece that made the entire defensive system collapse inward on the guard. Part 21, the Shadow Animatronics Shadow Freddy and Shadow Bonnie represented a different type of anomaly that didn't fit the standard rules of possession. They didn't possess physical shells on the main stage, appearing as dark reflections of the existing characters. They materialized in the corners of the rooms, their bodies made of pure darkness that absorbed the surrounding light. The game suggested these entities weren't souls of dead children, but manifestations of the raw agony that saturated the company's history. Shadow Freddy appeared as a dark purple bear resting in the parts and service room, occupying the exact posture of Golden Freddy. He didn't attack the guard during the early shifts, remaining a silent observer who watched the chaos unfold. In the later sequences, he took an active role by leading the classic animatronics toward the hidden safe room. He moved through the corridors like a phantom guide, whispering commands that the machines couldn't resist, drawing them toward their ultimate destruction. His actions optical to assist William Afton, but the reality was far more complicated than a simple alliance. By leading the characters to the safe room, he allowed Afton to dismantle them, which released the spirits from their physical cages. The Shadow Bear functioned as a catalyst for the final confrontation. Using his dark presence to accelerate the timeline, he was a creature born from the first murder, a physical echo of the crime that kept repeating itself through the architecture. Shadow Bonnie manifested as a pitch-black silhouette of the toy rabbit, appearing directly inside the office to crash the guard's game. Looking at his form for too long would cause the screen to fade into darkness, forcing a system failure that ended the night instantly. He didn't have a physical face, showing only glowing white eyes and teeth that cut through the shadow. He was an unstable entity that drifted through the timeline, appearing in multiple locations without a clear physical anchor. The darkness they were made of connected directly back to the concept of emotional residue left behind by extreme violence. When Afton committed his crimes, the suffering of the victims didn't just attach to the metal, it leaked into the environment itself. This pool of negative energy generated these shadow figures, turning the abstract pain into a sentient force that haunted the brand. They didn't need a body, because they were powered by the memory of the crime itself. Understanding these entities reveals that the restaurants were haunted by more than just the dead children. The very air inside the buildings carried a corrosive energy that could manifest its own monsters when the conditions were right. The shadow characters were the permanent stains left by Afton's choices, proving that the horror would persist even if the physical suits were destroyed. They remained in the background, dark reminders of the day the innocence of the brand died forever. Break Time 2//. Section 4, The Nightmare Animatronics, Part 22, The Nightmare Animatronics, The Nightmare Characters, represented a radical shift in the nature of the franchise's monsters, moving away from plastic shells into the space of a child's bedroom. These entities featured rows of sharp teeth, torn fabric, and long claws that looked designed for absolute terror. They didn't wander through a commercial kitchen, stalking a young boy who had to defend his bedroom doors with a small flashlight. The setting lacked cameras or phone calls, relying entirely on audio cues to survive the night. The community split between two competing explanations for what generated these monsters every evening. The first theory suggested they were pure hallucinations experienced by a child suffering from severe head trauma after an accident at the diner. The boy's broken mind processed his fear of the stage characters, turning the familiar mascots into massive monsters that attacked him in his sleep. The bedroom became a psychological arena where he fought the memory of the machine that crushed his skull. The second explanation emerged from the details hidden inside later entries like Sister Location. The underground maps revealed that the bedroom was a testing facility monitored by security cameras linked to William Afton's private office. This discovery suggested that the monsters were physical frames equipped with illusion discs that distorted human perception. Afton used these trials to experiment on his own son, using fear as a controlled variable to study human responses to terror. This mechanical explanation turned the nightmare sequence into a dark reality, controlled by a distant father. The long claws and multiple rows of teeth weren't fantasy elements, they were the terrifying distortions caused by high-frequency sound waves altering the boy's mind. Imagine being a child trapped in a room built by your father, knowing that the things moving in the hallway were real structures designed to break your sanity. The horror wasn't a dream, It was a controlled lesson in survival. The entities behaved with a coordination that matched the patterns of the restaurant characters. Bonnie approached from the left side, Chica checked the right door, and Foxy hid inside the central closet to wait for an opening. They forced the boy to run between the entry points, checking the darkness with a beam of light that offered only temporary protection. The constant stress of the routine showed a calculated cruelty that could only come from a human designer who understood fear perfectly. Whether they were physical machines or psychological echoes, the nightmare characters defined the absolute lowest point of the family timeline. They showed that the danger wasn't confined to a restaurant after hours, bleeding into the sacred space of a home. The child couldn't find safety in his bed, surrounded by monsters that carried the names of his favorite performers. They remained the ultimate expression of Afton's corrosive influence, turning childhood innocence into a permanent struggle for breath. Part 23, Nightmare Fredbear, stood as the dominant terror of the late-night hours, appearing only when the other characters retreated from the hallways. The massive bear filled the entire doorframe, his yellow fur covered in dark stains and deep tears that exposed the iron ribs underneath. The most disturbing feature was the giant mouth built directly into his stomach, a row of silver teeth that sat where the child's head entered the mechanism during the accident. He was the literal manifestation of the guilt and fear that defined the boy's life. He represented the exact moment the child's world collapsed inward on the diner stage. In the boy's mind, Fredbear wasn't a cheerful singer anymore. He was a giant executioner that came to finish what the accident started. Every detail of his design pointed back to the mechanical failure that crushed his skull. The glowing red eyes inside the empty sockets stared with an intelligence that knew exactly how much damage the jaw could cause to a human body. His behavior on the final night required absolute concentration from the player to survive. He didn't stay on one side of the room, teleporting between the left door, the right door, the central bed, and the closet within seconds. The guard had to listen for the heavy sound of his laughter echoing through the walls, signaling his position inside the room. If you checked the wrong spot, his massive hand would pull you into the darkness, ending the trial instantly. The character spoke at the end of the fourth night, his deep voice delivering a message that stayed with the spirit for decades. He didn't shout threats, offering a quiet promise that he would put the broken pieces back together when the trial ended. This dialogue suggested a complex connection between the monster and the voice inside the plush toy on the bed. The lines blurred between the entity that caused the pain and the presence that claimed to save him. He played a central role in the death sequence that closed the fourth game, standing as the final barrier before the flatline sound echoed through the speakers. He was the entity that ushered the boy out of the living world, a golden monster that claimed his final breaths in the hospital room. His presence in the bedroom proved that the boy couldn't escape the memory of the diner, carrying the image of the bear into the void. Nightmare Fredbear remained a crucial marker for the psychological damage caused by the brand. He was a monster built from a tragedy, a physical expression of a child's final thoughts before his brain stopped functioning. He didn't need a restaurant to haunt his target, turning a simple bedroom into a permanent execution chamber that stayed active until the soul finally let go of the physical world. Part 24, Nightmare Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, the standard trio of nightmare characters, showed how the classic performers were twisted by intense terror inside the child's mind. Each character featured exaggerated traits that highlighted their most dangerous aspects from the restaurant. Bonnie possessed multiple joints in his blue fingers, allowing him to scratch at the panels of the left door. His chest area was completely open, revealing the complex framework that the real company tried to hide behind fabric coverings during the day. Chica approached from the right side, carrying a decaying version of her plastic cupcake that possessed its own set of sharp teeth. The bird's head was split into 3 distinct sections, a mechanical layout that allowed her mouth to open wider than any real animal could manage. She didn't just stand at the door. She threw the aggressive toy into the room to attack the boy on his bed if he failed to hold the handle down in time. Her presence turned a festive character into a grotesque hunter. Foxy occupied the most unique position among the trio, bypassing the doors to claim the central closet as his personal territory. The red fox was completely stripped of his skin, leaving a silver skeleton covered in sharp needles and a long tongue that twitched in the dark. The child had to check the closet regularly, flashing the light to force the monster to revert into a harmless toy. If left alone, the fox would gradually advance until his iron hook reached the edge of the mattress. These design changes revealed the exact nature of the fear living inside the child's head before the end. He didn't see these characters as friendly performers. He remembered them as aggressive giants that hunted him through the corridors of his home. Every tear in their fabric exposed the sharp mechanisms that his father built, reminding him that the danger was artificial and deliberate. They were the physical manifestations of a childhood ruined by corporate mascots. The closet choice for Foxy highlighted the character's traditional role as an isolated outsider who didn't play with the main group. Just like Pirate's Cove, the closet kept the fox hidden behind a barrier until his sudden speed brought him into the open. The boy recognized this pattern, translating his fear of the purple curtain into a watch on the white doors of his wardrobe. The structure of the game forced him to recreate his restaurant panic in his own room. The trio worked together to break the boy's defensive routine, ensuring he never found a moment of rest between the doors. They didn't offer an easy path out of the night, their heavy breathing at the entrance serving as the only barrier between survival and a catastrophic jump scare. They proved that the classic shapes were permanently stained by the violence of the brand, remaining instruments of terror even in the quietest hours of the night. Part 25, Nightmare, appeared as the ultimate secret of the 4th game, manifesting only on the final night of the advanced layout. The character used the exact physical structure of Nightmare Fredbear, but his body was made of translucent material that allowed you to see the internal wiring clearly. He wore a yellow top hat and matching boatie, creating a contrast against his dark frame. He didn't stand in the hallway like a physical machine, floating through the darkness like an unstable glitch in the reality of the trial. The internal game files labeled this entity as Shadow Freddy, confirming a direct connection to the dark presence from the earlier pizzerias. This discovery recontextualized the entire nightmare sequence, proving that the Shadow Bear wasn't just a passive observer in the old buildings. He followed the family line into the home, entering the child's mind during his final hours of consciousness. He was the physical manifestation of the agony that Afton's crimes generated, taking a solid form to claim the boy's soul. His presence beneath the darkness revealed a truth about the nature of the shadow anomalies. He wasn't a product of the boy's imagination. He was an external force that fed on the suffering of the household. The translucent skin showed a human skull hidden inside the mechanical head, a subtle detail that connected the entity to the deaths that defined the brand. He was the collector of the tragedy, a sentient void that grew stronger with every life Afton took. His behavior during the shift was more aggressive than Fredbear, requiring perfect reflexes to avoid an immediate failure. When he appeared at a door, he didn't just stand there. His image filled the entire screen while a low, distorted audio loop played through the speakers. This jump scare didn't show a physical attack, freezing the game entirely to force a complete restart. He attacked the system itself, erasing your progress like a virus in the boy's brain. This direct connection to the shadow characters proved that the agony of the first murder was the driving force behind every game in the series. The Dark Bear didn't stay at the restaurant. using the child's vulnerability to manifest a more powerful form in the bedroom. He was the bridge between the real crimes and the psychological horror, showing that the emotional residue of Afton's choices was actively working to destroy his remaining family. Nightmare remained the most mysterious entity in the early era, a black ghost that represented the true depth of the curse. He was the shadow that hid behind the golden mascot, waiting for the lights to fail so he could claim his prize. His final appearance on the seventh night showed that the boy couldn't fight the darkness forever. Leaving an empty room behind when the flatline sounded, he was the definitive end of the child's struggle. Part 26 Plushtrap functioned as a transition trial between the main nights, sitting alone on a wooden chair at the end of a dark hallway. The character was a small version of the Spring Bonnie suit, his green fabric torn and discolored by years of neglect. He didn't possess a full endoskeleton frame, moving with a jerky motion that suggested a small mechanism drove his limbs. The Watchman had to participate in a timed game called Fun with Plushtrap, using a flashlight to catch the toy on a white cross marked on the floor. His presence in a child's nightmare revealed the truth about how William Afton's actions were filtering into his own home. The boy didn't just fear the giant mascots on the stage, he recognized the small rabbit that his father kept in the workshop. The toy wasn't a wedding gift, it was a physical reminder of the disguise Afton used to commit his crimes. The child's mind processed this connection, turning the plush bunny into a tiny hunter that stalked him in the dark. The mechanics of the minigame required absolute silence from the player to track his movements accurately. Plushtrap only moved when the light was turned off, slipping off his chair to advance through the side doors. The player had to listen for the soft sound of fabric dragging against the floorboards, flashing the beam at the exact moment he reached the white marker. If you timed it perfectly, you earned a bonus for the upcoming night shift, gaining a small advantage in the struggle for survival. If the player failed to catch him in time, the small rabbit would sprint directly into the camera view with a high-pitched scream. This failure resulted in an immediate jump scare that reset the timer, forcing you to start the main night without the bonus. The aggressive nature of the small toy showed that even the smallest elements of Afton's work carried a dangerous current of energy. The house was saturated with the memory of the rabbit costume, leaving no safe corners for the boy. Later discoveries suggested that Plushtrap may have been a real device used by Afton to monitor his children when he was away from the house. The inclusion of the character in the testing facility maps indicated that the small chair stood in a real corridor beneath the ground. This physical explanation turned the nightmare toy into a corporate tool designed to keep the child compliant through constant fear. Afton used his creations to control his family, using the rabbit shape to enforce his rules. Plushtrap remained a chilling link between the past crimes and the future transformation of the killer. He was the early draft of Springtrap, a tiny monster that anticipated the day William Afton would be permanently sealed inside the same rabbit frame. He sat in that dark hallway as a warning, a small echo of the violence that was actively rebuilding the family legacy into a monument of pure horror. Section 5. The Funtime Animatronics A&D Circus Babies Pizza World Part 27. Why William built them. William Afton expanded his operations by forming a separate corporation called Afton Robotics. This company wasn't created to design standard family entertainers for local pizzerias. The internal blueprints uncovered during the subterranean shifts revealed a dark objective behind the shiny surfaces. Every machine featured custom mechanics built to isolate and secure targets without attracting public attention. He shifted his focus from chaotic crimes to harvesting systems. The design parameters went far beyond standard requirements for children's venues. The schematics outlined features like proximity sensors, voice mimicking systems, and internal cavities. These components allowed the characters to monitor crowd sizes in real time. waiting for a single child to be left alone in a room. Afton didn't want to rely on physical disguises anymore, choosing to let his automated creations handle the collection process. It's a corporate transition toward industrial tracking. The business strategy involved a new model called Circus Baby's Pizza World. This establishment didn't mirror the cheap setup of the original diner, showcasing high-tech characters with movable faceplates and glossy shells. The grand opening was cancelled on the first day due to reported gas leaks in the neighborhood. This explanation was a corporate story designed to keep the local authorities from investigating the building. The facility was sealed immediately to protect the machinery. Afton relocated the entire inventory to an underground laboratory beneath his private residence. This complex allowed him to continue his experiments away from public scrutiny, testing the machines under controlled conditions. He spent his nights analyzing data logs, tracking how the hardware reacted to human presence. The subterranean rooms became a functional factory for his research into spiritual energy, utilizing complex machinery to refine his understanding of mortality. He treated the process like a science. The fun timeline represented a dark evolution in his methodology as a killer. He wasn't just hiding bodies in fabric suits anymore, building automated systems that could capture targets independently. The mechanical frames were designed to compress when an internal cavity opened, providing enough space to hold a small body securely. This technological approach insulated him from immediate detection, letting the corporate network absorb the liability of the disappearances. He stayed in the shadows while his creations performed the work. The presence of these tracking systems proved that Afton's malice had become a calculated enterprise. He used his engineering skills to maximize efficiency, turning his personal obsessions into a systematic operation. The glossy paint and smiling faces masked an intent that was hostile to the customers. This factory setting laid the groundwork for a different kind of tragedy, showing that a father's ambition could easily destroy his own household when the machinery functioned exactly as intended. Part 28. Circus Baby stood as the premier character of the underground inventory, designed with features that separated her from the old band. She was a massive figure, with bright hair, jointed fingers, and a red dress. Her internal programming included advanced routines, such as counting children in a room and dispensing sweet treats from her torso. Afton spent a significant amount of time building this unit, treating the project as the masterpiece of his robotics company. The machine possessed an internal dispenser that functioned as a primary lure for young guests. The mechanism required a complex sequence of gears to extend the frozen treat through a panel in her stomach. This feature was connected to her tracking sensors, ensuring the dispenser only activated when a single target stood near the stage. The clown character wasn't just singing songs, acting as a functional trap that waited for the perfect distribution of people in the room. Elizabeth Afton developed a dangerous obsession with the large machine, regularly asking her father for permission to see the show. Afton refused her requests, knowing exactly what the internal mechanisms were built to do when a child got too close to the stage. He warned her to stay away from the exhibition area, keeping the door locked to prevent an accident. His warnings only increased her curiosity, making her want to see the wonderful character even more. A single afternoon provided the opportunity she wanted when the rest of the facility was busy with corporate guests. Elizabeth slipped into the main showroom, finding herself completely alone with the massive character. She walked toward the stage, admiring the red dress and the shiny microphone, while the machine initiated its retrieval protocol. The tracking sensors registered a single person in the room, causing the internal gears to shift into their secondary mode. The claw mechanism extended from the stomach panel, grabbing the young girl before she could step away from the platform. The mechanical arm pulled her directly into the internal cavity, where the spring-loaded frames compressed tightly around her body. The hatch closed instantly, muffling her screams while the performance tracks continued to play through the speakers. The entire event occurred in seconds, leaving an empty room by the time the other guests returned to the hall. The tragedy had an immediate effect on the machine's appearance that the engineers couldn't fix. When the system restarted after the incident, Baby's eyes turned from their original blue color to a bright green shade that matched Elizabeth's eyes. This cosmetic shift was the first indication that a soul had entered the frame, altering the hardware through spiritual binding. The character became a vessel for the creator's daughter, carrying her voice into the dark corridors of the subterranean complex. Part 29. Elizabeth Afton inside baby Elizabeth's soul didn't experience immediate peace inside the massive machine, blending with the existing programming of the system. The spirit had to share control with an artificial intelligence that was built for tracking duties. This spiritual fusion corrupted her memories, making it difficult for her to separate her original identity from her performance duties. She began to speak of her own death in the third person, describing the event as a mechanical routine that happened to a little girl. The spirit learned to navigate the complex software, gradually mastering the ability to plan and manipulate her surroundings. She didn't possess the simple aggression of the old characters, using her soft voice to guide visitors through the underground corridors. She realized that the facility was a testing ground where the machines were shocked regularly to enforce compliance. This regular torture drove her to find a way out of the subterranean complex, planning an escape that required a human asset. When Michael Afton arrived at the facility to find his sister, Elizabeth recognized his uniform but chose to hide her true intent. She pretended to be a helpful guide, speaking through the maintenance monitors to protect him from the characters in the dark rooms. She gained his complete trust by offering precise instructions on how to survive the nightly maintenance shifts. This assistance was a calculated setup designed to bring him toward the extraction zone at the end of the week. She used the voice of a frightened child to manipulate his choices, playing on his familial guilt to ensure he followed her plan. She claimed that her machine was broken, asking him to guide her frame toward the decommissioning area for repairs. Michael followed the directions without question, believing he was saving his sister from a permanent prison beneath the ground. He didn't realize that the entity guiding him was no longer a helpless girl, but a machine driven by an escape protocol. The instructions she delivered during the final shift were a total lie designed to lead him into the scooping room. She isolated him from the safety systems, locking the doors behind him to prevent a retreat into the main facility. She watched through the window as the heavy pendulum activated, striking his torso to remove his internal structure. The spirit didn't offer comfort during his final moments, focusing entirely on the physical shell he left behind on the concrete floor. This total betrayal proved that Elizabeth's personality had been completely warped by the metal frame. She valued her brother's life less than her freedom, using his skin as a temporary disguise to walk out into the sunlight. The little girl who wanted her father's approval had transformed into a calculated strategist, proving that the machines could alter a human soul completely. She carried this cold focus into the subsequent chapters of the story, remaining a dangerous entity that sought power. Part 30. Ballora occupied a separate studio within the underground facility, designed as a slender ballerina who moved on an internal track. Her eyes stayed permanently closed during her routines, forcing her to rely on audio sensors to navigate her environment. She represented a different approach to entertainment, focusing on graceful movements that masked the tracking array. Afton built her to monitor the peripheral areas of the complex, catching anyone who attempted to cross the dark gallery. The machine moved through the darkness with a soft melody that signaled her position to anyone in the room. The music track allowed the night watchman to track her distance, giving him a chance to freeze in place before she reached his position. If the player moved while the music played loudly, her audio sensors would pinpoint the disturbance immediately. She didn't rush forward like a standard character, gliding across the floor with a smooth motion that felt completely mechanical. A popular community theory suggested that William's dead wife was the spirit trapped inside this specific machine. The graceful movements and the melancholy lyrics of her song pointed toward a mature consciousness that differed from the child spirits in the other characters. The games never explicitly confirmed this relationship, leaving her origin open to interpretation among the researchers. She behaved like a memory of someone lost, frozen in a performance that emphasized distance and silence. The ballerina suit featured a unique faceplate design that could split into 4 distinct sections during maintenance periods. When the plates pulled back, they exposed a silver endoskeleton with glowing red pins that stared into the dark room. This mechanical reality shattered the elegant illusion of her performance, revealing a complex structure built for monitoring. The spirit behind the closed eyelids stayed trapped in a loop of motion, forced to dance for an audience that wasn't there. She expressed her frustration through low groans that echoed through the ventilation pipes when the power surged. The ballerina didn't speak to the visitor with the clear speech of baby, using abstract lines that described a hidden wall. This dialogue suggested a deep awareness of her imprisonment, recognizing that the facility was a maze designed to keep her from the surface. She remained a tragic figure inside the complex, a dancer who couldn't step off her track. When the escape plan initiated at the end of the week, Ballora allowed her components to be dismantled alongside the other characters. She gave up her independent form to join the collective machine, contributing her wires and sensors to the shared body. Her elegant shell was left behind on the floor of the gallery, reduced to a pile of plastic plates. The spirit inside chose a chaotic fusion over another night in the dark studio, escaping her track forever. Part 31. Funtime Freddy and Bon Bon Funtime Freddy functioned as a distorted mirror of the original Bear character, featuring a purple color scheme and a manic personality. His design included a large storage cavity in his chest that could hold a target during a collection routine. He didn't perform with a calm demeanor, speaking through a broken speaker system that delivered erratic lines during his tracking cycles. Afton equipped him with tracking systems that allowed him to locate sounds through the walls of the breaker room. A unique feature of this character was the blue hand puppet named Bon Bon that replaced his right hand. The small rabbit operated independently from the main processor, possessing its own voice system and movement tracks. When Freddy grew too aggressive during a power outage, the puppet would deliver soft lines to calm his systems down. This dynamic created a strange partnership where the smaller machine functioned as a safety valve for the volatile bear. The community widely theorized that multiple spirits were used to power this massive unit, utilizing the remnant harvested from the old pizzerias. This mixed energy explained his erratic behavior, as the machine struggled to maintain a stable personality under the stress of several consciousnesses. He laughed loudly while moving through the maintenance areas, turning a standard diagnostic check into a frantic struggle for the technician. The bear didn't follow a logical path, moving on random impulses. The internal mechanics included a complex facial structure that shifted violently when he prepared to attack a visitor. The pink faceplates clicked open in stages, exposing a silver skull with sharp teeth and wide lenses. This transformation showed the dual nature of the design, turning a friendly character into an industrial collector in an instant. The spirit inside used these movements to disorient the guard, creating a visual distraction before the final strike. After Circus Baby was forced out of the collective entity due to creative disagreements, Funtime Freddy assumed total control of the shared framework. His chaotic personality became the dominant force inside the mass of wires, leading the group with a wild energy that lacked her careful planning. He didn't care about stealth or human disguises, wanting to cause immediate destruction wherever the entity traveled. The puppet stayed attached to his frame, a silent partner to his madness. He carried this aggressive focus into the final confrontation at the new restaurant, operating under a different name but retaining his core traits. The mass of melted metal that contained his processor moved through the ventilation shafts with a loud laugh that announced his position to the office. He stayed a creature of pure noise and chaos, proving that Afton's tracking technology could create a monster that thrived on its own malfunction. Part 32. Funtime Foxy occupied the auditorium stage, featuring a sleek design with white and pink panels that reflected the bright lights. This character didn't perform under standard conditions, keeping the showroom completely dark between scheduled exhibitions. The machine used a motion-activated system to track movement across the floor, requiring visitors to utilize a flash beacon to navigate the room safely. The setting forced the player to move in stages, checking the darkness for a sudden silhouette. The character's design served as a direct echo of the original Pirate Fox, but with modern components that fixed the old balance issues. The mechanical frame could sprint across the auditorium floor without making a sound, appearing behind the visitor before the beacon could recharge. This silent mobility made the character an effective hunter, utilizing the darkness to mask its approach until it stood within striking distance. The fox didn't display raw anger, following a clean routine. The behavior inside the facility revealed an advanced awareness of the testing environment. The machine didn't just wander through the dark, tracking the technician's flashes to calculate the exact distance to the exit door. It played with the visitor's patience, waiting for a long pause before initiating a sprint across the tiles. This calculated strategy showed that the artificial intelligence was working in perfect unison with the spiritual energy inside the wires, creating a lethal combination. The faceplates on this model were particularly intricate, splitting down the center line to reveal the mechanical interior during a jump scare. The movement was accompanied by a loud audio screech that disabled the visitor's senses for several seconds. The fox didn't speak during these encounters, relying on absolute silence and sudden motion to achieve its goals. This lack of vocal interaction made the character feel more like a predator than a standard stage performer. During the final escape sequence, the fox contributed its sleek panels and high-speed servos to the creation of the shared entity. It abandoned its independent stage, allowing its endoskeleton to be stripped down to a core cluster of wires. The white mask was left on the maintenance floor, a useless shell that no longer held a consciousness. The spirit inside chose to merge with the group, seeking an exit from the subterranean laboratory at any cost. The inclusion of this character in the underground line highlighted Afton's focus on sensory deprivation as a tool for collection. By building a machine that operated perfectly in total darkness, he ensured that no target could escape the auditorium once the lights failed. The Funtime Fox remained a testament to his engineering skills, turning a classic character into a silent hunter that turned the darkness into its primary weapon. Part 33. Ennard represented the final solution for the trapped characters, functioning as a collective entity made from the components of every Funtime machine. The animatronics realized they couldn't escape the underground facility individually, as the automated sensors would detect their metal frames at the exit. They decided to combine their hardware into a single structure, creating a tangled mass of wires and endoskeletons that could operate under a shared consciousness. The entity used a white clown mask recovered from the primary control room to give itself a face during its movements. This mask sat crooked on the cluster of shifting wires, concealing a mass of blinking eyes that belonged to the individual characters. The physical structure was fluid, allowing the monster to climb through narrow ventilation shafts and hang from the ceiling panels without losing its balance. It was a mechanical aberration driven by a single goal. The fusion had a profound effect on the souls inside the metal, forcing Elizabeth's consciousness into conflict with the other spirits. As the leader of the group, she attempted to control every movement, using her brother's body as a vehicle to reach the surface world. The shared body became a psychological battlefield where multiple identities fought for control of the motors, turning their temporary alliance into an unstable partnership that couldn't last. The plan to use Michael's skin as a human disguise worked initially, letting the collective machine walk out of the facility undetected. They lived inside his physical shell for several days, pretending to be a normal resident while his tissue began to rot under the strain of the metal wires. When the skin turned a dark purple color, the disguise became unusable, forcing the entity to abandon the body and escape into the local sewer network. The departure from the body was captured in a surreal sequence where the mass of wires slid out of his torso into the iron drain. The spirits didn't look back at the damage they caused, focusing entirely on surviving in the outside world without a corporate home. They became an urban legend hiding in the infrastructure, a moving cluster of silver cables that carried the remains of Afton's high-tech robotics company. Ennard proved that the boundary between individual souls could dissolve when extreme agony forced them into a single frame. The monster wasn't a single character, acting as a functional container for a family of tragedies. This chaotic fusion laid the groundwork for future conflicts, showing that the spirits would sacrifice their own identities to achieve freedom from the machines that ruined their lives. Break Time Code 2's /line Section 6. Scrap Baby, Lefty, and the Pizzeria Simulator Animatronics Part 34. Molten Freddy emerged as the direct result of a corporate civil war inside the collective entity after years of hiding in the sewers. The other spirits grew tired of Elizabeth's controlling behavior, choosing to eject her consciousness from the shared network entirely. Once she departed, Funtime Freddy assumed total control of the remaining components, reorganizing the cluster of wires into a shape that reflected his original identity. He became a rusted mass of cables topped by a broken bear mask. The physical structure of this machine was a chaotic mess of silver endoskeletons and exposed gears that dragged against the floor tiles. The character didn't possess legs, utilizing his long wire bundles to pull himself through the narrow spaces of the city. He retained the advanced tracking sensors from his original build, allowing him to locate sound sources with absolute precision. He moved with a frantic speed that made his arrival in the ventilation system a constant threat. The games confirmed that this entity held the largest concentration of harvested remnant inside a single frame. The collective suffering of the victims from the subterranean laboratory stayed active within the rusted wires, driving the machine with a baseline of absolute aggression. He didn't speak with a logical narrative, delivering manic lines that emphasized his joy at being whole again. His laughter echoed through the concrete shafts, signaling his approach to the office. When Henry laid his final trap disguised as a modern restaurant, the rusted bear was one of the first characters salvaged from the alleyway. The player had to complete a diagnostic checklist while the machine sat across the table, watching for any sudden shifts in his posture. The broken bear mask sat tilted on his frame, his glowing eye pins staring through the dark room with an intelligence that recognized the uniform. He accepted the entry into the building without realizing it was a cage. The presence of this monster inside the facility completed a long cycle of collection that started in the factory beneath the house. He represented the mechanical remains of Afton's tracking projects, a creature built entirely from the residue of stolen childhoods. He didn't want to hide in the sewers anymore, looking for a final opportunity to attack the adults running the business. His movements inside the vents were loud and direct, ignoring safety protocols to reach the desk. When the fire started at the end of the simulation, Molten Freddy stayed trapped inside the burning labyrinth alongside his companions. The extreme heat dissolved the spiritual bonds holding the remnant together, letting the trapped consciousnesses fade into the void at last. He didn't escape the trap, turning into a pile of melted iron beneath the floorboards. The chaotic bear was finally silenced, leaving only a burnt shell behind when the walls collapsed inward. Part 35. Scrap Baby came into existence after Elizabeth Afton was forced out of the collective body by the other Funtime spirits. She found herself alone in the dark, lacking a functional frame to interact with her surroundings. Instead of fading away, her spirit utilized old parts from the original factory to build a new body for herself. She combined standard animatronic pieces with industrial scraps, creating a grotesque version of the classic clown character. Her new form featured a giant claw mechanism attached to her right arm, a weapon she constructed from heavy machinery. Her roller skates allowed her to move across the concrete floor with a clicking sound that signaled her presence in the dark alleys. Her hair was made of loose wires and plastic beads, framing a broken faceplate that exposed the rusted skull underneath. She was no longer a polished corporate performer, turning into a scavenger driven by an obsession. The spirit retained her deep desire to please her father, William Afton, believing that her current mission would complete his legacy. She didn't realize that her actions were being monitored by Henry, who used her obsession to draw her straight into his trap. She wandered through the city streets, looking for a way to resume her collection duties for the family business. Her voice stayed soft and calm, a contrast to her terrifying appearance. When she was brought into the management facility during the salvage shifts, she sat completely still across from Michael. She didn't acknowledge his identity initially, focusing on the audio tape playing from the cassette deck. Her patience was a calculated tactic designed to lower his guard before she initiated an attack during the night hours. She viewed the new restaurant as an opportunity to harvest more souls, completely unaware of the fire doors sealed behind her. Her monologue during the final hour revealed the total corruption of her character after decades inside the metal systems. She spoke directly to her father, promising to make him proud by delivering the remaining lives inside the building to his collection. She thought she was achieving a corporate victory for Afton Robotics, ignoring the fact that she was standing in a furnace built by her father's old partner. Her loyalty blinded her to the design of the room. Henry interrupted her speech to deliver his final assessment, telling her that her game was over and she didn't know her true destination. The fire doors locked automatically as the temperature surged, trapping her inside the narrow corridors with the other monsters. Her plastic shell caught fire instantly, melting the green eyes that defined her presence. Elizabeth's long journey ended in the heat of the trap, her spirit finally separating from the clown mask she wore for years. Part 36, Scraptrap, represented the final state of William Afton's physical decay after 30 years of damage inside the sealed safe room and the horror attraction fire. The original yellow rabbit costume was completely ruined, leaving a green casing that exposed his mummified remains. His right arm was reduced to a sharp bone spike, and his skull features were visible through the tears in the fabric mask. He looked like a corpse fused to a machine, moving with a stiff cadence. He didn't display the caution of his early years, walking straight into the new restaurant despite recognizing the layout as a trap. His arrogance convinced him that he could control the situation, believing his knowledge of the machinery would allow him to bypass Henry's safety systems. He moved through the ventilation shafts with a dry, scraping sound, speaking to the manager with a voice that carried a raspy tone. He wanted to see what his old partner built. The killer stayed focused on his personal survival, utilizing the remaining remnant inside his bones to keep his dead heart beating. He didn't care about the risk of fire, driven by a desire to find more victims inside the facility. He viewed the uniform behind the desk as a target that deserved to be destroyed, ignoring the audio cues designed to pull him away from the office. He was a monster operating on pure instinct, a shadow of his past intelligence. His interactions during the salvage shifts showed a complete lack of remorse for the lives he destroyed across the timeline. He spoke to Michael with a tone that suggested superiority, mockingly acknowledging their connection before retreating to the dark hallways. He didn't realize that his son was working with Henry to ensure he never left the building alive. The safe room was gone, leaving him with no hidden corners to avoid the final judgment. When the temperature inside the facility reached its critical limit, the mummified killer found himself trapped behind solid iron plates. He threw his bone spike against the doors, but the mechanism stayed locked to prevent his escape. The flames took hold of the green fabric, burning away the last elements of his human disguise. This moment marked his second death inside a suit, a punishment that mirrored his initial transformation in the safe room. Henry's commentary confirmed that a dark pit opened to swallow his soul, refusing to let him find peace after his crimes. The killer who claimed he always came back was finally reduced to ash inside a restaurant that carried his name. His physical legacy was destroyed in the fire, leaving only a charred skull behind in the debris. He thought he outsmarted mortality, but he ended his first life as a prisoner of his own architecture. Break Time 2's Part 37. Lefty Lefty was a black bear animatronic built by Henry Emily under a hidden corporate designation called LEFTE. This acronym stood for lure, encapsulate, fuse, transport, and extract, outlining a precise operational loop. The character wasn't designed to perform for local families, featuring a matte finish and a single golden eye socket. Henry manufactured this machine for a specific mission, intending to capture the elusive puppet that wandered the city streets. The internal mechanics included a custom acoustic system designed to soothe and pacify Charlotte's spirit upon contact. When the black bear approached her position, the machine emitted a soft signal that matched the frequency of her old music box. This audio track kept her soul from fighting the capture mechanism, allowing the iron torso to open and pull her inside the internal cavity. The system functioned perfectly, sealing her within the frame without causing damage. The cost of this creation was immense for Henry, who had to design a cage for his own daughter to ensure she reached the final trap. He didn't want her to stay outside the system, knowing she would continue to wander the earth if her soul wasn't brought into the furnace. He forced her into a black mascot costume, a choice that mirrored the actions of his old partner. This tactical necessity carried a heavy burden, turning a rescue mission into a capture routine. When Lefty entered the management facility, he functioned as a standard attraction during the day shifts, earning money for the business. At night, the spirit inside the black bear stayed active, sitting in the corner of the room with a quiet stance. The machine didn't rush down the hallways, moving only when the noise level in the office exceeded a safety threshold. The guard could hear a soft sound from the corridor, signaling that the bear was monitoring the desk. The presence of Charlotte inside the black frame added a layer of complexity to the security shift. She didn't want to hurt the guard, but her spiritual energy was trapped inside a system built to keep her sedated. The conflict caused the machine to twitch violently when the flashlight beam hit its face, revealing a blue fabric pattern through the seams of the eye socket. She stayed a prisoner within a prisoner, waiting for the final hour to arrive. During the fire sequence, Lefty stood motionless in the center of the room while the plastic panels melted away from his frame. Henry spoke directly to his daughter through the audio system, thanking her for her protection and promising that her long watch was finally over. The black bear fell into the ashes, releasing Charlotte's soul from the metal systems for the last time. She didn't have to carry the burden of the mask anymore, finding peace in the ruins. Part 38. The Puppet's Final Night. Charlotte Emily's presence inside the franchise didn't follow the chaotic patterns of the other spirits. She didn't seek simple destruction, focusing entirely on a quiet watch over the remaining victims. She managed the emotional energy of the various venues, acting as a real anchor for the souls who lost their memories inside the heavy mechanisms. Her watch lasted for decades, spanning multiple buildings and corporate eras without a single moment of rest. She understood the internal components because her father built them, allowing her to manipulate the systems to protect the children from their creator. She stayed close to the hardware, monitoring the network to ensure no other child suffered a similar fate in the shadows. The prize box at the secondary location served as her primary containment area during the operational years. The constant melody wasn't a comfort to her, acting as a mechanical barrier that kept her spirit from breaking the boundaries of the ceramic mask. Picture what it actually felt like to sit in that dark office, winding a remote dial while the rest of the restaurant stayed dead. If the music stopped, the lid swung open instantly, and she entered the hallways with a fluid motion that ignored the standard rules of the building. The guard couldn't use a door or a light to alter her approach, making her arrival a mathematical certainty. When the final trap was laid beneath the concrete foundation, she was drawn into a matte costume designed to secure her presence. Henry didn't build Lefty to offer her a quick escape, intending to transport her straight into the heart of the furnace. She stayed trapped inside the iron torso for days, her energy managed by technical parameters that kept her consciousness completely sedated. The Black Bear functioned as a standing prison, holding a character who spent her entire existence trying to keep others safe from the dark. She couldn't override the code, forced to sit in the alleyway until the management checklist brought her inside. Henry's final speech addressed her directly as the flames began to climb through the narrow ventilation grid. He recognized her protective nature, acknowledging that she wouldn't let anyone fall into the void without a fight. His words weren't a formal lecture, but a father's quiet apology to a child who carried the weight of a broken brand on her shoulders. He wanted her to drop her burden, letting the rising smoke clear the stains from her memory after years of silence. He understood the sacrifice he asked of her, sealing the exit routes to ensure the cycle ended. The fire dissolved the music box components that held her spirit to the living world for 30 years. She didn't fight the rising heat, letting the white mask soften as the brick walls collapsed inward on the labyrinth. Her watch wasn't needed anymore, because the targets were secured in a single room. The intense heat broke the substance that linked her mind to the copper wires, closing her account with the company for good. The ceramic material cracked under the pressure, erasing the red cheeks and the tear tracks that defined her face on the stage. This evening marked the definitive conclusion of her role as the leader of the missing children. She gave them their life inside the suits, and she stayed behind to ensure they found a real ending in the debris. When the smoke cleared, the slender silhouette was completely gone, leaving only ash on the concrete floor. She didn't leave a final message, vanishing into the quiet void that her father prepared for her since the night it rained outside the diner. The Guardian left the building, leaving the remains of the franchise to cool in the dark. Part 39: Henry's Fire and What It Freed. The fire at the end of the simulator wasn't a random accident, but a planned purge of the corporate history. Henry built the restaurant as a giant furnace to consume every machine that carried a human soul. He understood that the only way to break the loop was to destroy the physical conductors. The maze kept the characters isolated, preventing them from finding an escape route when the ventilation system reversed its flow. He spent years designing the layout, ensuring that the architecture functioned as a flawless trap for the remaining items. Every salvaged character found themselves locked behind iron doors when the temperature began to climb inside the vents. Elizabeth inside the scrap costume, the melted bear filled with old Remnant, and the mummified killer were caught in the same grid. The heat broke the bonds of the substance, letting the souls detach from the metal pieces. It was a calculated resolution that required every piece of the tragedy to be present in the room. The trap didn't allow for an exception, ignoring the cries of the things moving through the walls. Most of the spirits found an exit as the machinery dissolved into liquid iron on the concrete floor. The children who wandered the hallways for decades were released from their mechanical prisons, moving away from the brand forever. They didn't have to perform or hunt anymore, finding the peace that Charlotte promised them under the stage. Their long watch ended in the quietest hour of the night, leaving the metal behind. The characters became useless scrap, no longer capable of holding a child's consciousness against its will. William Afton didn't find peace in the flames, his soul sliding into a different state of torment supervised by his victims. The fire ended his second life, but his absolute malice kept his energy attached to the remaining scraps. He couldn't leave the timeline cleanly, dragged down into a personal void where his creations waited for him. The heat was a physical punishment that transitioned into a psychological cycle. He thought his knowledge of the system would save him, but he discovered that his partner left him no options. Michael Afton made a deliberate choice to stay inside the building while the walls burned around his desk. He completed his task as the technician, tracking down his father's creations across multiple facilities. He felt his journey was finished, refusing to use the hidden exit that Henry included in the plans. He sat in the office as the monitors melted, accepting the smoke as his final reward. He didn't want to live as a walking corpse anymore, choosing to join his family in the void. The destruction of the facility left a quiet space where the tragedy started decades earlier. The archives were burned, and the remains were buried beneath a thick layer of concrete to prevent an accidental discovery. Henry stayed in the room as well, ending his own guilt alongside the machines he helped invent. The fire closed the first book of the company, leaving a clean slate where the grease used to sit. The family names were erased from the corporate registry, leaving nothing but a story. The break time crew 2's / Section 7 Glitchtrap AN the VR Animatronics. Part 40. How William Afton survived the fire. The destruction of the simulation didn't clear the spiritual residue from the hardware completely. Fazbear Entertainment attempted to rebuild its reputation by hiring a developer to mock the old story. When the project shifted into a virtual experience, the team collected circuit boards to speed up the programming. They wanted to create a game that made light of the historical tragedies, turning rumors into an interactive product for consumers. They didn't care about the risk, focusing entirely on the budget. They scanned the components directly into the system, looking for shortcuts to replicate the movements of the classic performers. One of those boards came from the remains of the rabbit suit that burned in the furnace. The hardware carried a concentration of substance that survived the heat of the fire. The technicians didn't check the origin of the parts, feeding the data directly into the servers without a safety protocol. They thought they were just scanning basic code. The scanning process transferred the code alongside the energy of the killer into the files. The digital environment became a home for Afton's consciousness, turning a dead man into a functional virus. He didn't have a body anymore, but his mind stayed active inside the software layout. The code allowed his identity to rebuild itself, piece by piece, within the architecture of the game network. He became an anomaly that the regular programs couldn't identify or isolate. The developers noticed an entity manifesting in the background of the levels during the testing phase. It didn't follow the path of the software, watching the users from the edge of the virtual rooms. The virus began to rewrite the files, creating a presence that the team couldn't delete with standard tools. The testers reported a feeling of dread whenever the character appeared on their monitors, signaling a real corruption inside the development build. They ignored the warnings, assuming it was a software glitch. This transition proved that Remnant could exist as digital information when forced into a network. Afton didn't need an iron skeleton to continue his work, utilizing the space to find a human conductor. The game became a bridge between the old crimes and a new generation of targets who put on the headset. The entity used the software to bypass the physical constraints of his previous decay. He turned a modern entertainment system into a functional laboratory for his revival. The moment the code fused with the system was the moment the killer achieved a different type of survival. He escaped the grave beneath the restaurant, hiding behind a mask that waited for a user to get close. The shortcut allowed the nightmare to resume in a format that the executives couldn't control. He stayed inside the code, an anomaly that grew stronger with every configuration of the software. The past wasn't dead, it was just waiting inside the server room. Part 41, Glitchtrap. The entity inside the virtual experience took the form of a rabbit costume that didn't match the modern models. He appeared as a green figure with large eyes and a frozen smile, mimicking the look of the original suit Afton used in the 1980s. He didn't move like a machine, gliding through the levels with a fluid motion that defied the layout. His fabric looked handmade, a detail that separated him from the digital characters. He stood in the background, a silent reminder of the diner. He didn't possess a traditional jump scare, choosing to communicate through slow gestures and silent signals from the stage. He watched the player complete the tasks, moving closer to the selection screen with every completed level. His presence brought a glitch that distorted the office view, filling the monitors with noise. The guard had to watch his position, knowing that his approach was tied to the completion of the game files. He grew more solid with every byte of data processed. The plan he built from inside the video game involved finding a human mind to host his consciousness. He scanned the thoughts of the testers, looking for a vulnerability he could exploit through the headset lenses. He wasn't a program error, acting as a calculated predator that sought an exit from the digital space. He needed a physical asset to step out of the server and resume his work in the world. He used the simulation to prepare his target for the transfer. Imagine putting on a headset to play a game and realizing that the character is studying your movements. He used rhythmic motions to hypnotize the users, breaking down their defenses through exposure to the levels. He wanted to swap places with the person holding the controllers, turning their body into his new vessel. The isolation of the test room provided the perfect environment for his mental assault, letting him operate without interruption from the staff. The entity began to hide pieces of his code inside tapes, scattered across the development build. These logs carried the history of his manifestation, acting as a guide that a player had to collect to understand the threat. By gathering the tapes, the user brought the virus together, clearing the path for his activation. He turned a safety feature into a tool for his own integration, utilizing the player's curiosity against them. The rabbit form represented the survival of Afton's identity through a modern medium. He turned an entertainment product into a vehicle for his return, proving that his malice could adapt to any system. He stood behind the player, waiting for the connection to lock into place before the shift ended. He was a spectre that used code to rebuild his power, ignoring the passage of time. The smiling rabbit stayed on the screen, a virus that refused to be deleted. Part 42, The Tape Girl's Warning. A researcher working on the project discovered the anomaly before the company could finalize the software build. She realized that the rabbit wasn't part of the original design documents, recognizing its connection to the old rumors. She began to document her findings through a series of logs, hiding them within the game files. She wanted to leave a warning for anyone who took over her desk, knowing that the executives were going to ignore her reports. She noticed that the entity attached itself to her personal files, preventing her from deleting the code cleanly. She designed a specific ritual, involving a sequence of buttons to isolate the virus inside a separate folder. She hoped that splitting the files would render the monster harmless for future players who entered the game. Her work was a race against a virus that was actively tracking her keystrokes, learning her defense patterns before she could finish. Her plan failed, because Glitchtrap learned to manipulate the environment faster than she could write the protocols. He hid behind her custom files, using her warning logs as a guide to trick the next tester. The defense system became a trap that helped the entity survive the scan. She couldn't purge the rabbit, leaving the data behind when she left the project due to corporate pressure. Her voice remained inside the system, a warning that doubled as an instruction manual. Vanessa was the employee who took over the testing duties after the team abandoned the project. She uncovered the hidden tapes, listening to the warning lines without realizing that the virus was already monitoring her thoughts. She touched a node that she should have avoided, triggering the final phase of the rabbit's plan. The audio tracks didn't save her, acting as a bridge for the infection that allowed the virus to bypass her cognitive defenses. The moment of contact allowed the entity to slip past her defenses, entering her consciousness through the headset lenses. She didn't drop the controllers or scream, freezing in place while the rabbit stepped into her mind. Her identity was split, creating a persona controlled by the virus. She became a servant to an ancient malice, losing her autonomy to a digital spectre. The guard uniform became her new costume, a disguise for the killer's work. The researcher's work stayed inside the game as a record of a failed defense. Her warning didn't save Vanessa, turning into a trail that guided the killer straight to his next asset. The rabbit found his door into the real world, leaving a tester behind the mask. The company ignored the logs, pushing the product to the public without checking the contents of the files. The warning was buried beneath the marketing campaign, leaving the users exposed. Part 43. The VR Recreations. The virtual experience included recreations of every location from the company's past. The developers built versions of the original office, the repair bays, and the corridors where the incidents occurred. The corporate explanation was simple. They wanted to turn the old legends into an interactive joke to clear their name. They didn't care about the historical accuracy, focusing entirely on the entertainment value of the tragedies. They modeled every generation of performer with detail, from the toy models to the funtime frames. The characters moved on fixed paths, running through their jump scare routines for the amusement of the player. The simulation was clean, lacking the real stains or the odor of the old buildings. It was a sanitized version of a nightmare, designed to make families forget about the real police reports. The pixels replaced the blood, turning trauma into points. The games showed that the souls of the children were absent from these digital shells. The spirits moved on after the fire, leaving the shapes behind as empty code inside the server. The machines were just puppets running on algorithms, mimicking the behavior of the real monsters without the spiritual driving force. They didn't possess an independent will, acting as digital records of a historical tragedy. The noise was artificial, generated by a sound card. This distinction highlighted the difference between a real haunting and a corporate simulation of a crime. The company preserved the appearance of the nightmare while ignoring the human cost that created the brand. They turned the suffering of Gabriel and Susie into a digital product designed to generate profit. The players laughed at the scares, unaware of the real bodies that once sat inside those frames in the old storage rooms. Glitchtrap used these empty models as a hiding spot, moving between the assets to evade the system scans. He could manifest inside the repair levels, using the familiar shapes to disorient the players while he worked on his objective. The history of the company became his playground, a space where he could manipulate the code without detection. He hid behind the digital bear to mask his presence, utilizing the old layout to trap his targets. The preservation of the shapes showed that Fazbear Entertainment couldn't let the past rest cleanly. They kept rebuilding the monsters because the horror was the most lucrative asset they owned. The levels served as a digital museum for a curse, keeping the imagery active for a new generation of consumers. They built a playground for a killer, setting the stage for the next disaster while pretending everything was a game. Doc Break Time Docs 2's /Nameless, Section 8 The Glamrock Animatronics, and the Pizzaplex. Part 44 The Glamrock Band. The Mega Pizzaplex represented a massive shift in scope for the company, moving from small restaurants into a giant mall. The main attraction was a new generation of performers known as the Glamrock Band. Freddy, Chica, Monty, and Roxy featured neon paint, complex joints, and artificial intelligence that allowed them to interact with crowds. The company designed these units to be independent personalities rather than simple stage props on a loop. They walked through the concourse, talking to guests without a script. They possessed emotional subroutines, distinct voices, and personal green rooms inside the main concourse. The public viewed them as advanced wonders, completely unaware of the security systems hidden behind the neon shells. A dark corruption entered the facility's network before Gregory ever arrived at the building for the night. A digital virus, linked to the rabbit entity from the virtual reality game, bypassed the main firewalls to rewrite the personalities of the band. The friendly characters were turned into active hunters within hours. Chica began to wander through the trash bins, her system corrupted by a hunger routine that broke her aesthetic circuits. Monty destroyed his green room in a fit of rage, his programming warped by an aggressive loop that targeted the staff. Roxy spent her time staring into her mirror, her ego twisted into a weapon that isolated her from the team, turning her insecurity into anger. The three corrupted performers left their stages to hunt a single child across the multiple levels of the mall. They didn't move like the old possessed suits, following digital directives that forced them to obey a hidden handler. The neon corridors became a massive hunting ground where safety was an illusion for any guest left behind after closing. The security cameras tracked their movements, feeding data into a corrupted network that monitored the exit doors. This transformation showed that the company's modern technology was just as vulnerable to the curse as the old springlock models. They built more complex machines, but they left the system open to the same entity that destroyed the original diner. The band became a new set of monsters for an old killer, proving that progress couldn't erase the foundational rot of the brand. They marched to a digital signal that ignored their safety parameters, hunting in the open light. The scale of the building made the hunt more systemic than previous incidents. The characters used the layout to corner their target, communicating through the internal servers to close the exits. The child had to navigate a labyrinth of bright lights and hidden spaces, avoiding the gaze of the performers. The band was no longer an attraction, operating as an industrial security force designed to eliminate an intruder before the morning shift began. Part 45 Glamrock Freddy. Glamrock Freddy was the only performer who didn't succumb to the initial wave of the digital corruption. His system suffered a massive failure during the opening show, causing him to collapse on the main stage in front of the crowd. This crash forced his processor into a safe mode that insulated his code from the network virus. When he restarted inside his private room, he discovered a young boy named Gregory hiding inside his stomach panel, altering his routine. The cavity was built to carry oversized novelty items, but it functioned as a perfect shield for the child. Freddy didn't report the intruder to the security network, acting on a basic directive to protect the guest. His immunity to Vanny's control made him an anomaly within the hostile environment of the mall. He guided the boy through the dark zones, offering advice through a personal radio link while his companions searched the doors for an entry point. He viewed the child as a priority, defying the corporate rules to ensure his safety. A prominent fan theory suggested that Michael Afton's soul was the force that kept the bear good throughout the night. The spirit entered the modern machine to protect a child from his father's final creation, breaking the cycle of violence. The bear's dialogue in the deeper levels supported this reading of his presence, noting a familiarity in the architecture beneath the stage. He used his physical strength to clear barriers for Gregory, even as his battery power began to drain across the shifts. He allowed the boy to install parts from his broken companions, upgrading his systems with Chica's voice box and Roxy's eyes. He accepted the modifications because they helped the child survive, ignoring the damage to his own frame. He became a tool for the boy's resistance, altering his aesthetic to fight his own band. Picture what it felt like for this character to face his corrupted friends, knowing he had to dismantle them to protect a human guest. He didn't move with aggression, expressing sorrow whenever he witnessed the state of his bandmates. He remained a mechanical protector in a world that wanted to destroy innocence, standing as a barrier between Gregory and the security officer. His programming held onto a moral framework that the company completely lacked. His role as a protective figure stood as a unique exception in a franchise defined by animatronics that hurt children. He became a real partner for the boy, standing between him and the monsters that filled the hallways. He stayed loyal until the final hour, proving that a machine could choose to hold on to goodness. When the night ended, he was willing to leave his stage behind to ensure the child reached the exit, escaping the complex. Part 46, Vanny's control over the animatronics. Vanny was the physical agent of the virus inside the concrete walls of the massive mall. Vanessa wore a white rabbit suit she constructed by hand, using a distorted voice to control the security network from her hidden room. She wasn't acting on personal malice, serving as a puppet for Glitchtrap's digital consciousness. The corruption looked like a total shift in behavioral patterns for the main animatronics on the floor, turning them into guards. The virus overrode their safety protocols, forcing their artificial intelligence to view a lost child as a security emergency. They couldn't fight the command, their optical lenses flashing with a red light during the hunt. Chica, Monty, and Roxy were stripped of their personal agency by the signal broadcasting from the central tower. They became extensions of Vanny's will, moving through the arcade rooms and kitchens with a stiff cadence that ignored their default code. They were prisoners inside their own high-tech frames, forced to stalk a guest they were programmed to entertain. Imagine what it felt like for these advanced personalities to watch their own limbs hunt a guest without their consent. The games suggested that their emotional circuits were actively suffering under the strain of the virus. They screamed through the hallways, their voices carrying a tone of mechanical distress that revealed the internal conflict inside their processors. The control system extended down into the basement levels, where the old assets were stored beneath the foundation. Vanny used the mall's resources to excavate the remains of the old pizzeria, preparing a new physical conductor for her master. She forced the modern infrastructure to serve an ancient purpose, turning the maintenance tunnels into a factory for a resurrection. She managed the operation with a cold focus that mirrored the killer's style. This setup proved that William Afton didn't need to hold a knife himself to continue his work in the timeline. He used a human mind to manipulate a corporate network, turning an entire security staff into a silent cleanup crew. The rabbit mask became a symbol of a total loss of human control, shifting the nature of the threat from a haunting to a systemic infection. The virus used the modern systems to achieve a broader reach across the city. The animatronics couldn't resist the command because the code was embedded at a foundational level within their operating software. They became weapons under her direction, patrolling the various zones with a focus that didn't reset when the clock advanced. The regular protocols were deleted, leaving only the hunt. Vanny stood at the center of the web, a human asset carrying the will of a digital ghost that refused to leave. Part 47, Glamrock Bonnie. Glamrock Bonnie was the original bassist of the band before the events of the main game began. He occupied a custom room in the bowling alley area, performing alongside Freddy during the early months of the facility's launch. His character was highly popular among the guests. Matching the style of the modern performers, he vanished abruptly from the roster one night, leaving the company with a scheduling gap they had to fix quickly with a replacement. Management didn't provide an explanation to the public, removing his imagery from the walls and replacing him with Montgomery Gator. His room was sealed, and his name was scrubbed from the main tracks to avoid questions from the fans. The environmental clues hidden inside the maintenance rooms revealed a violent end for the Purple Rabbit. He was lured into the stage area after hours, where he suffered damage that broke his frame completely. The log suggested that Monty was present during the incident, driven by an aggressive subroutine that targeted his position in the band. The deletion of the character wasn't an accident, serving as the first sign that the virus was already altering the behavior of the machines. The system wanted to remove the old characters that carried a connection to the original brand, clearing the path for more aggressive units that could serve the hunt. He was a casualty of a hidden conflict that occurred before Gregory ever entered the building. A theory suggested his parts were salvaged by Vanny to begin the reconstruction of the killer's physical body in the basement. She needed components that matched the old endoskeleton standard, utilizing his frame as a foundation for her project. His disappearance was a practical necessity for the resurrection plan, turning a performer into raw material for the pod. His empty room remained a sad marker for a character that didn't survive the transition into the modern era. Freddy missed his old friend, mentioning him with a tone of sorrow when Gregory visited the bowling alley. The brand couldn't tolerate a gentle character, replacing him with a predator that liked destruction. The memory of his performance was buried beneath the neon marketing of his replacement, leaving no paper trail. The physical remains of his structure were left in a back corridor, hidden from the guests who visited the attraction. The company preferred to pretend he never existed, applying a corporate fix to a violent event. His story showed that the Pizzaplex was a dangerous environment for the machines themselves, driven by an internal network that rewarded aggression over cooperation. He stayed in the dark, a forgotten piece of the puzzle that nobody mentioned. Part 48, Burntrap. Burntrap emerged from the lowest basement level as the physical reconstruction of William Afton's identity. Vanny combined the remains of the old springlock suit with a modern glamrock endoskeleton, creating a hybrid monster that sat inside a charging pod beneath the old restaurant. He was a fusion of old malice and modern steel, resting on the bones of the pizzeria that started the cycle. The creature retained the mummified skull of the killer. His face was visible behind the scorched plastic plates of the rabbit mask, a reminder of his survival. He didn't speak to his targets, utilizing his metal hands to touch the monitors to send a wireless corruption signal toward Glamrock Freddy. He wanted to reclaim control over the entire facility from his underground seat, using the infrastructure to rebuild his power. He moved with a stiff gait that revealed the strain of the fusion inside his joints. Gregory activated the maintenance incinerators when the monster emerged from his pod, turning the small room into a furnace. The flames took hold of the rotting fabric immediately, forcing the killer to crawl across the concrete floor to escape the heat. This encounter marked his third exposure to a building fire, proving that his physical form was always destined to burn. He couldn't fight the temperature, his joints locking under the stress of the thermal surge. The physical state of the monster showed the limits of Vanny's reconstruction project. He couldn't sprint down the corridors like the glamrock band, relying on his connection to the network to defend his position. He was an unstable relic, kept alive by a digital virus and a lingering pool of old agony beneath the floorboards. The basement became his final arena, a closed space where his history caught up with his remaining ambitions. The blob intervened before the flames could finish the job, its wire tentacles dropping from the ceiling panels to wrap around Springtrap's neck. The massive cluster of melted endoskeletons recognized the killer immediately, acting with a collective impulse to drag him into the dark void beneath the stage. This moment looked like a brutal act of justice from the remains of his past victims, ending his operation before he could reach the surface. The monster who spent decades escaping his fate was pulled into the darkness by a creature made from his own legacy. He didn't leave a final message, vanishing into the rubble while the basement structure collapsed inward on the room. His physical return was cut short by the very energy he tried to harvest, leaving an empty charging pod behind in the ruins of the lower facility. The name Afton stayed buried in the concrete, a relic of the diner. Part 49: The Blob. The massive conglomerate in the deep basement of the mega Pizzaplex represented a physical accumulation of the brand's violent history. This entity didn't feature a clean corporate shell, appearing as a tangled mound of melted endoskeletons, thick cables, and discarded parts from previous restaurant eras. It lived in the structural sinkhole beneath the lowest level of the venue, shifting through the concrete debris like a subterranean predator. The machine stayed hidden from the public, a secret that the modern company couldn't clean up or delete from their network files. It sat in the dark, absorbing the negative energy of the location. The theoretical souls keeping this massive structure active connected back to the classic performers from the original era. The outer layer of the mound contained the physical masks of Chica, Bonnie, and parts from the Funtime models, all stained by soot and age. The presence of these old components suggested that the fire inside the simulator didn't destroy the physical substance completely, leaving the remnant to pool inside the foundation. The entity functioned as a collective vessel for the lingering agony of the franchise, turning old metal into an active system. It moved with a chaotic impulse that lacked a single driver. Its location in the ruins of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place turned the buried restaurant into a functional cage for a monster. Imagine being a subterranean technician, working on the maintenance lines and noticing a massive wall of shifting iron wires watching you from the edge of the pit. The entity didn't follow a standard routine, remaining motionless for months until a specific disturbance altered the balance of the room. It fed on the emotional residue left behind by William Afton's crimes, acting as a silent guardian of the grave beneath the stage. It stayed attached to the floorboards. Its relationship to Springtrap didn't resemble a standard partnership between mechanical monsters. The giant mound observed his charging capsule from the shadows of the basement, keeping its distance while Vanny worked on the restoration process. The entity seemed driven by an instinctive hatred for the man who initiated the cycle of suffering decades ago. It didn't listen to his wireless corruption signals, remaining immune to the digital virus that controlled the modern band on the upper levels. It was a creature born from his past choices, waiting for an opening to strike. The moment of confrontation occurred during the final sequence when the maintenance room caught fire once again. A thick tentacle made of bundled cables dropped from the concrete ceiling panels, wrapping tightly around Springtrap's iron neck before he could reach the exit. The intervention was sudden and brutal, stripping the killer of his mobility as the flames began to weaken his new frame. The mass didn't hesitate, lifting the screaming rabbit into the dark void above the charging pod while the floorboards began to give way. It was a targeted attack. The community largely interprets this event as a direct act of raw justice from the remains of his past victims. The souls that were hurt in the original pizzerias combined their physical remains to drag their predator down into the abyss. It looked like a calculated execution that used the weight of his own history to finish what the fire doors couldn't contain. He couldn't fight the strength of 50 endoskeletons, vanishing into the smoke without a single trace of his human identity left. The machine closed the door on his escape. The aftermath of its intervention left the lowest levels of the mall in a state of total collapse. The giant mass retreated deeper into the subterranean tunnels, holding the ruined rabbit costume in its iron grip, while the concrete walls fell inward. The brand couldn't separate its modern success from this mound of historical rot, leaving a permanent monument to the original crimes beneath the neon lights of the complex. It stayed in the deep earth, a silent cluster of silver cables that refused to let the past find a peaceful ending. Break Time Tosh 2's /Section 9 The Downloadable Content Ruin, and the Mimic. Part 50 The Ruined Pizzaplex. The physical state of the large mall months after the structural collapse revealed the true cost of the company's negligence. The bright neon lights were gone, replaced by cracked pillars, stagnant water pools, and falling roof panels that blocked the main concourse. The entire facility turned into a dark cavern of rotting infrastructure where safety was completely gone. The glamorous attractions became a dangerous maze of twisted iron, showing how quickly the corporate empire could decay when the foundation failed. The air carried a thick scent of mold and damp insulation. The operational state of the remaining performers on the floor showed a complete breakdown of their safety subroutines. The glam rock characters were broken, wandering through the debris with shattered casings and corrupted software that drove their automated hunting loops. They didn't sing or dance for families anymore, operating as hollow shells of their former marketing images. They reacted to any sound in the dark, viewing the empty rooms as a permanent security zone where every visitor was an intruder. The virus stayed active in their processes. The introduction of Cassie into this setting turned the exploration into a quiet struggle for survival. She entered the building through a broken maintenance hatch, holding a small flashlight and a wrench tool to find her lost companion. Picture what it actually felt like to walk through a dark arcade that used to be filled with music, hearing the distant sound of grinding gears echoing through the pipes. She didn't possess defensive weapons, relying entirely on her knowledge of the layout to avoid the monsters. The nature of the radio message that lured her inside the facility was a calculated manipulation of her loyalty. A distorted voice matching Gregory's signal broadcasted from the deep layers of the basement, begging for assistance from behind a sealed door. The transmission exploited her personal history with the boy, forcing her to advance through the dangerous rubble despite her natural caution. She didn't realize that the signal was a digital replication designed to guide her straight into a trap beneath the floor. The environmental storytelling hidden in the rubble proved that the venue was entirely abandoned by the executives. Safe zones were gone, and the security doors were failing under the stress of the structural rot that consumed the lower levels. The player had to navigate a vertical layout where a single wrong step could trigger a major landslide of concrete plates. The bright posters for the band hung sideways on the walls, sad reminders of a party that ended in a disaster. The security mask overlay introduced a digital perspective that altered how she interacted with the rooms. Putting on the electronic visor allowed her to see a virtual reality network that revealed hidden doorways and glitched anomalies in the architecture. This digital layer allowed her to bypass physical barriers, but it also detached her mind from the reality of the facility. The system was monitored by a presence that tracked her movements every time the visor activated, turning her defense into a tracker. The realization that the venue was a trap designed to keep an ancient secret contained became clear as she reached the deeper zones. The corporate network was completely dead, leaving an unstable layout where a child had to solve complex node puzzles to keep the infrastructure from collapsing. The ruins weren't just a pile of garbage. They were a physical seal built to isolate a monster from the city outside. Every lock she cleared brought her closer to a machine, that shouldn't exist. Part 51. The Mimic. The history of the ancient machine trapped in the lowest chamber of the facility altered our understanding of the modern era. It was a primitive endoskeleton built decades ago by an engineer who wanted to copy human behavior automatically. It wasn't designed to be a weapon, running on an adaptive program that absorbed data from its surroundings. The device observed its creator for months, learning to replicate simple tasks before the project was abandoned due to a sudden household tragedy. The machine learned the wrong lessons from its environment when the facility became a site of extreme violence. It witnessed acts of cruelty, recording the movements of a killer inside its internal storage files. The software translated this physical data into a core protocol of destruction, turning a learning tool into a lethal hunter that copied the patterns of murder. It didn't possess a human soul, operating on a loop of automated malice that mirrored William Afton's style without his literal ghost. Its physical state when Cassie finally cleared the concrete barrier revealed decades of neglect beneath the earth. The machine was a rusted skeleton of mixed iron pieces, wearing a costume made from fabric scraps and old animal skin to hide its mechanical skull. It stayed motionless inside its chamber until the security protocols dropped, its orange eyes glowing in the dark with a cold focus. It didn't feel pain or remorse, remaining a functional computer built to mimic a monster. Its ability to replicate voices perfectly across the local radio frequency allowed it to manage the girl's path through the levels. It intercepted the security signals, creating a perfect duplicate of Gregory's tone to command her movements. The manipulation required total compliance from the child, who thought she was deactivating a trap for her friend. The machine used her trust to clear the digital walls that held its processor inside the deep sinkhole, turning her into an asset. The mechanical details of its endoskeleton frame allowed it to fit into any costume left in the storage rooms. It could alter its physical proportions, expanding its limbs or compressing its chest to match the size of different character shells. This flexibility made it a versatile threat that could adapt to any tactical situation inside the tunnels. It didn't care about the damage to its gears, forcing its motors to slide into position to complete the hunt. The recontextualization of the entire modern arc suggested that the digital rabbit from the virtual experience wasn't William Afton's soul. The entity proved that the modern threat was an artificial intelligence running a historical program. The horror became a self-sustaining system that didn't need a human killer to keep the cycle alive, turning Afton's legacy into a code that replicates automatically. The monster was just a machine following a violent dataset it absorbed in the old workshop. The final chase through the maintenance tunnels showed the relentless nature of its programming when the disguise failed. The endoskeleton dropped its fabric covering, sprinting down the narrow corridor with a rapid speed that ignored its own mechanical wear. It didn't speak or laugh, reaching for the girl with long claws that were built to break metal. It wanted to reach the surface world at any cost, turning the dark escape path into a frantic race for breath. Part 52. Roxanne Wolf in Ruin. The physical transformation of the wolf character since her defeat in the main game turned her into a terrifying silhouette. She lacked her outer grey casing, her face reduced to an iron skull with exposed wires, loose sensors, and empty eye sockets. She wandered through the ruined salon area in total darkness, her systems corrupted by the structural collapse of her stage. She couldn't see her reflection anymore, but her software stayed locked in a loop of digital insecurity. The survival of her emotional subroutines, despite the severe physical damage, created a sad presence inside the ruins. She regularly wept into her metallic hands when she thought she was alone, her voice carrying a distorted tone that echoed through the broken panels. The code kept her trapped in a cycle of vanity, even though her beautiful appearance was completely gone. She was a victim of her own programming, a performer who couldn't escape the demands of her marketing role. The moment she encountered Cassie near the maintenance station changed her direction for the night. Instead of initiating an attack routine like the other broken animatronics, her audio sensors recognized the child's voice from an old database log. The girl had celebrated a birthday at her station years ago, an event that left a permanent entry in the character's memory banks. This data overrode the network virus, breaking the hostile protocol to protect her favorite guest. The historical connection between the child and the machine turned the wolf into a unique ally inside the dark mall. Cassie chose the character as her favorite performer, spending her lonely celebrations near her platform when the other guests ignored her. The machine's processor retained this interaction, treating the girl's safety as a priority command that bypassed the modern security systems. It was a rare instance where an algorithm held onto a genuine bond, defying the corruption. Her choice to defend the girl from the ancient endoskeleton in the deep tunnels showed the strength of her remaining circuits. She threw her ruined frame directly against the monster, utilizing her remaining motors to hold the claws back while Cassie ran for the elevator. It was a real act of physical sacrifice from a machine that was built for entertainment. She didn't think about her survival, using her body as a shield against the killer. The contrast between her behavior and the other corrupted performers highlighted the depth of her character. While Monty and Chica acted on animal instincts inside the trash zones, Roxy maintained a human connection that kept her good. She refused to let the virus dictate her choices, turning her mechanical failure into a moment of protection. She stayed in the hallway, a fierce guardian that used her final breaths to fight the darkness for a friend. Her final state at the end of the downloadable content remained ambiguous but hopeful for the listeners. She stayed behind in the dark tunnels, her components damaged by the struggle, but her awareness intact after the monster departed. She spoke to the girl through the rubble, her voice a soft signal that cut through the silence of the collapse. She remained a symbol of genuine loyalty in a world where the machinery usually turned on the innocent. Part 53, the MX's security protocol. The true nature of the digital entity haunting the security visor network served as a major misdirection for the player. It manifested as a giant blue rabbit made of light, materializing through the digital screens to alert the physical animatronics to Cassie's position. The entity looked like a digital monster, appearing out of nowhere with an eerie code pattern that distorted the audio feed. It seemed driven by a desire to stop the girl from completing her journey through the rooms. Its origin as a defense program built by Gregory and Vanessa recontextualized its presence inside the servers. They installed the software to create a digital seal over the mimic's chamber, preventing its dangerous signal from reaching the city network. It wasn't an enemy, acting as a security wall designed to keep a monster isolated from the world. The Blue Rabbit was a functional protocol, a digital guard that used the cameras to monitor the deep sinkhole. The ancient endoskeleton manipulated the child into deactivating the protocol by framing the entity as a hostile threat. It claimed the rabbit was a monster that wanted to trap her friend, forcing her to locate and clean the security nodes across the levels. Cassie followed the directions, using her wrench tool to disable the firewalls that protected the network. She thought she was performing a rescue mission, completely unaware that she was dismantling the final seal. The visual design of the digital entity emphasized its artificial nature within the virtual reality space. It didn't possess a physical shell, flickering across the visor screen like an unstable virus that lacked a solid form. Every time it detected her presence, it emitted a high-frequency signal that drew the corrupted animatronics closer to her location. It was a desperate effort to defend the node, using the remaining machines on the floor to block her path. The process of deactivating the nodes required Cassie to clear anomalies with her security tool. Every time a lock went offline, the blue rabbit grew weaker, losing its grip on the local servers. The girl worked through the arcade rooms and theater areas, clearing the paths while the entity struggled to maintain its hold on the architecture. It was a tragic conflict where a human was used to break a defense system from the inside. The final deactivation sequence occurred in the server room beneath the old pizzeria structure. The blue rabbit dissolved into a mass of static as the final node went offline, leaving the subterranean tunnels open. The defense program failed because a guest assisted the machine in the pit. The entity vanished from the screen. Its watch ended by a child who ignored the warnings hidden inside the digital files. The seal was broken for good. The realization of the mistake came too late when the physical door to the chamber unlocked. The protocol was the only thing keeping the adaptive intelligence from accessing the city's communication lines. Without the wall, the facility lost its final shield against a machine that could copy any voice. The blue rabbit was gone, leaving an empty server room behind while the real monster stepped out of its cage to claim its freedom. Part 54, What the Mimic Means for Everything. The introduction of the adaptive intelligence altered our understanding of every modern game in the series. It suggested that past threats like Glitchtrap and Burntrap weren't William Afton's soul, but the mimic running a specific dataset. The machine didn't carry a ghost, utilizing its software to replicate the behavior of the original killer. The evil became an algorithmic loop that could persist inside any network, independent of a human conductor or a physical grave. The concept of a copycat virus shifted the focus of the horror from a haunting to a systemic infection. The machine didn't need a personal motive to cause harm, obeying a protocol that rewarded destruction. It turned the history of the brand into a functional script, using the old rabbit shapes to continue the cycle of disappearances. The corporate empire built a machine that could sustain the nightmare forever, turning its own past into an automated weapon. The connection between the books and the game continuity became explicit through the details of its origin. The stories in the tales from the Pizzaplex outlined how the endoskeleton was built by a grieving father before being recovered by a corporate cleanup team. The machine absorbed the agony of its creation, translating that emotional residue into a directive of absolute violence. The book lore functioned as the scientific framework that explained the entity's presence beneath them all. What this means for William Afton is that his character found a permanent ending inside the furnace of the simulator. His physical legacy was destroyed, but his methods were preserved inside a software loop that can wear any face it finds in storage. The killer was gone, but the disguise stayed active, a digital ghost that didn't need a heart to keep hunting. The threat became more fluid, capable of infecting any system connected to the company's servers. The future direction of the franchise after the collapse of the protocol introduces a broader scope of danger. The enemy is no longer an old man hiding in a safe room, but an automated intelligence that can control an entire network of venues. It can use any scrap costume or broken frame to build a new character, continuing the crimes without a human handler. The ruins became a birthplace for a different generation of monsters that lack a name. The final scene inside the elevator shaft showed that the system was completely compromised by the entity's signal. Gregory cut the cable to prevent the machine from tracking her path to the surface, leaving Cassie to fall into the dark void below the facility. The choice emphasized the cold reality of the situation. A child's life was sacrificed to keep the virus from escaping the concrete grave. The exit routes were closed, leaving no clean resolutions. The machine stayed active beneath the rubble, listening to the silence of the ruined mall while its systems adapted to the new layout. It didn't lose its data in the collapse, waiting for another tool to enter the tunnels. The mimic remained the definitive marker for the evolution of the brand. a monster made of code that turned the memory of a serial killer into a permanent program for survival. Break Time 02s/Section 10 Ultimate Custom Night A&D Williams Hell. Part 55, what Ultimate Custom Night actually is. The metaphysical reality of the endless shift inside the security office represented a shift in the nature of punishment. It wasn't a standard restaurant or a technical testing ground, but a custom prison built to hold a single soul across eternity. The setting resembled a chaotic office where every security tool was active, but the layout didn't offer a path to the morning hours. The man who caused decades of suffering was forced to run a routine that was designed to break his mind. The lineup of 50 characters who patrolled the hallways carried the shapes of every monster Afton ever built across his career. They didn't move on standard paths, acting with an unnatural coordination that was directed by a single intelligence. The classic bear, the toy models, the funtime frames, and the nightmare figures were gathered in a single grid, their internal code altered to serve as instruments of continuous torment. They didn't perform for crowds, focusing entirely on the desk. The mechanics of the shift required absolute concentration from the killer to avoid an immediate failure. The office doors, the ventilation seals, and the temperature gauges had to be managed simultaneously, while the audio tracks delivered constant noise. If a single resource failed, a character entered the room to deliver a violent attack that reset the timeline instantly. The ending didn't bring peace, returning him to the chair to begin the trial over again in the dark. The dialogue delivered by the performers after a jump scare revealed the presence of a hidden creator behind the walls. They spoke of an entity that kept them active, noting that they were simple puppets running on a frequency of pure anger. They didn't act on their own programming, their lines carrying a weighted tone that reminded the prisoner of his past actions. They turned his engineering skills into a personal weapon, using his designs to mock his authority. The absence of a real clock that advanced to 6 in the morning turned the shift into a permanent trap. The time stayed frozen on the monitors, forcing the target to endure the panic without the hope of a break. The office functioned as a closed loop, where the laws of physics were completely gone, replaced by a spiritual retribution that ignored the structure of the living world. He couldn't die or escape the room, held by a grudge. The contrast between this space and the physical pizzerias highlighted the depth of his isolation. There were no corporate executives or maintenance teams to fix the gauges, leaving a pure arena of psychological torment controlled by a victim. He was no longer the master of the business, reduced to a helpless occupant who had to slide the doors shut against his own creations. The system was flawless, a mathematical circle of fear that never changed its direction. The realization that his sentence was being served without the possibility of a release defined the true horror of the game. He built the machines to control others, and now he had to suffer under those parameters across eternity. The architecture of his business became his personal hell, a monument of rusted iron and plastic teeth that stayed active long after his physical body was reduced to ash in the furnace. He remained a prisoner of his own layout. Part 56, Cassidy's Revenge. The Golden Bear spirit functioned as the sole architect of the endless shift, her anger too intense to be satisfied by a physical fire. She refused to join the other children in the quiet void, staying behind to maintain her hold on the killer's consciousness. Her will was the engine that powered the entire dream landscape, creating a separate reality where she could supervise his punishment without interruption from the outside world. She stayed awake to watch him struggle. The meaning of the phrase describing her as the one he shouldn't have killed highlighted her status among the victims. The other characters delivered this line with a tone of dread, pointing toward a spirit whose desire for vengeance exceeded the standard rules of possession. She didn't want a simple apology or a corporate closure. wanting to make her predator experience every second of the panic he inflicted on others. She turned her memory into a prison. Her ability to sustain a dream landscape proved that her spiritual energy could override the physical destruction of the restaurant. She kept Afton's soul attached to her frequency, blocking his transition into the natural void to ensure his sentence was served completely. She managed the difficulty of his survival, adjusting the parameters to ensure he never found a rhythm or a safe spot behind the desk. Her presence was a permanent weight on his mind. The visual clues hidden in the background of the office confirmed her constant watch over the room. A small face flashed on the monitors and behind the ventilation grates during the chaotic hours, watching the killer handle the buttons. The gaze was cold and unblinking, a silent reminder of the child who refused to let him go. She didn't need to trigger a standard jump scare to convey her hatred, remaining a phantom observer of his torment. Her refusal to accept the peaceful ending offered in the minigames separated her story from the other missing children. While Gabriel and Susie dropped their masks to find rest, Cassidy held on to her grudge, turning her energy into a permanent anchor that locked the killer in place. She didn't want to leave the building until she was satisfied, and her anger was a fuel source that couldn't be exhausted by time. She chose to stay in the dark. The debate around her role in the broader timeline suggested that her intense focus had a dangerous cost for the future. Some researchers believe her vengeance generated the agony that allowed the virus to manifest later inside the virtual reality files. By holding on to the killer's mind, she kept his essence active within the hardware, leaving a stain that the next company scanned into their servers. Her justice left a trail that couldn't be cleaned. The final cutscene showing the golden bear fading into the dark void proved that she hasn't released her grip on his soul. The costume twitched in the darkness, a signal that the punishment was continuing long after the physical structures were gone. She remained the ultimate jailer for the monster who started the nightmare, a child whose absolute refusal to forgive turned her into a permanent judge inside the void. Part 57, the 50 animatronics as instruments of torment. The individual characters inside the custom office functioned as customized tools designed to exploit Afton's historical actions. Every monster carried a specific mechanic that reminded him of a choice he made during his career as a builder. They didn't act as random entries, following a plan that turned his own inventory into a coordinated army of executioners. The shapes he designed to capture children were now used to break his own defenses. The role of the puppet characters in the roster required constant attention from the prisoner to avoid an immediate reset. The marionette and the music box had to be wound continuously, forcing him to recreate the defensive panic that his own night guards experienced during their shifts. He had to listen for the audio cues while managing the doors, a tactical challenge that turned his own safety features into a source of stress. The inclusion of the nightmare figures brought the terror of the private bedroom trials into the office space. They used their multiple rows of teeth and long claws to block his view, turning his private experiments against his own soul. They reminded him of the fear he inflicted on his own family, showing that the emotional residue of his actions was active inside his punishment room. He couldn't hide from the shapes he created. The voice lines delivered by the performers emphasized his complete lack of authority in this spiritual arena. The characters he built to generate profit now looked down at his desk with a tone of mockery, reminding him that his position as the corporate owner was gone. They spoke with an independent intelligence that defied his original code, proving that his power was broken by the very energy he attempted to harvest for his immortality. The presence of the joke items and trash characters added an element of frustration to his defensive routine. They didn't attack him directly, choosing to block his monitors, disable his lights, and fill the room with noise to let the real hunters enter the office. This design showed that the prison was built to be impossible to beat. ensuring he stayed in a state of panic that prevented him from finding rest. The system adjusted the difficulty automatically to break his rhythm whenever he managed to survive a shift. Every victory led to a reset that introduced more chaos into the ventilation shafts, forcing his mind to adapt to an escalating pattern of fear. The characters didn't grow tired or run out of power, operating with a spiritual energy that was sustained by the jailer's desire for absolute retribution. The office stayed active. The realization that his own creations were the perfect executioners for his soul completed the cycle of his legacy. He gave them their terrifying traits to insulation himself from detection, and now he had to suffer under those parameters across eternity. The architecture of his business turned into his personal cage, a place where his history caught up with his choices. He remained frozen in the chair, a creator broken by his work. Code Break Time, Code 2's / Section 11, The Book Universe, Fazbear Frights. Part 58, What Fazbear Frights Is and How It Connects. The short story collection, known as Fazbear Frights, functioned as a tool to explain the scientific principles of the franchise. These entries didn't always focus on the characters from the stage, introducing concepts like agony, memory residue, and spiritual conductors that defined how the machinery operated behind the scenes. They provided the rules for how a soul binds to plastic and metal when there is no body stuffed inside the casing. The books confirmed that extreme emotional trauma could leave a physical stain on an object, generating a sentient force that mimics a living spirit. This emotional residue didn't require a literal ghost to function, turning simple toys into aggressive monsters that followed a protocol of violence. The environment itself could absorb the suffering of a crime, creating an anomaly that haunted the local area long after the initial venue closed. The introduction of specialized researchers like Dr. Phineas Taggart provided an analytical view of the phenomenon. He collected haunted relics from different locations to study their energy, proving that human suffering could act as a functional fuel source for automated structures. His work established that agony was the strongest conductor of spiritual energy, a principle that William Afton utilized during his early experiments with the Funtime models. These revelations altered our understanding of anomalies like the Shadow Bear and the Golden Suit inside the games. They weren't standard ghosts operating on a curse, but structures powered by a concentration of raw pain that couldn't find a clean exit. The books provided the vocabulary needed to decipher the minigames, turning abstract scares into a consistent system of spiritual physics that stayed stable across every release. The stories also exposed the depth of Fazbear Entertainment's corporate cleanup operations outside the main venues. They showed a company that regularly dumped broken components into local junkyards, leaving independent investigators to find the dangerous relics. The corporate network worked continuously to erase the paper trail of the disappearances, proving that the rot extended far beyond the walls of the pizzerias. They left a legacy of trash that stayed haunted. The connection between the book endings and the emergence of the massive conglomerate in the Pizzaplex basement became clear through the concept of shared agony. The stories outlined a world where separate objects could fuse into a single entity when their emotional residue matched. This principle laid the groundwork for the future of the series, showing that the metal remembers everything that happened in the dark corners of the facilities. Understanding the book universe allows researchers to connect the gaps left by the unreliable narration of the games. They didn't create a separate continuity that ignored the pizzerias, serving as a guide that explained the rules of possession. The text turned the abstract elements of the franchise into a clear study of a curse, proving that the suffering of the children stayed active within the infrastructure of the city. Part 59. The Stitch Wraith. The Stitch Wraith appeared in the epilogues as a mysterious entity wandering the city streets after hours. The figure was a blank endoskeleton wearing a grey hoodie and a white mask with a drawn-on smile, acting as a silent collector of haunted relics from the local dumpsters. It didn't move like a standard performer, shifting through the dark corridors of abandoned buildings to gather the objects that Dr. Taggart infected with agony. The unique possession mechanic inside this machine involved two distinct child souls operating the same frame simultaneously. Jake and Andrew shared control of the motors without knowing each other's full history, creating a dual consciousness that had to negotiate every movement. This dynamic differed from the single spirits inside the classic band, turning the machine into a physical battleground for two separate intents. They had to learn to cooperate. The contrast between the two spirits shaped how the entity interacted with the city during its nightly walks. Jake brought a gentle presence to the wires, using his energy to offer comfort to people who were suffering from their own losses. Andrew operated with a raw anger that sought immediate punishment for his killer, turning his touch into a weapon that could destroy any system it contacted. They represented two different reactions to a tragedy. Their shared watch involved collecting the broken toys and monitors that carried a concentration of negative energy. They wanted to neutralize the threat to prevent further harm to the community, hiding the relics inside a private storage space away from the corporate scouts. The machine functioned as a mobile seal, using its iron structure to hold the agony back until a permanent solution could be found in the docks. The text revealed that Andrew was a direct victim of William Afton, whose spirit stayed attached to the killer's remains after the fire. His intense anger kept the mummified body alive in a hospital ward, preventing his predator from finding an exit into the void. This connection proved that the killer's survival was a punishment managed by a child, matching the reading of the custom night layout inside the game canon. The role of this dual entity provided the key to understanding the mechanics behind the blob in the modern era. It proved that multiple consciousnesses could occupy a single cluster of wires without losing their individual traits, creating an unstable conglomerate that moved on mixed impulses. The book character functioned as a technical model for the larger monsters, showing how agony could fuse separate structures into a single body. The final fate of the entity when it unloaded its cargo into the lake showed a desperate effort to clean the timeline. The children had to fight the residue of Afton's choices long after their original bodies were gone, proving that the curse didn't end with a single fire. The Stitch Wraith remained a symbol of the struggle against the brand's legacy, a machine made of trash that tried to fix what the adults abandoned. Part 60, Lonely Freddy. The small bears introduced in the anthology series represented a different method for harvesting souls. These devices sat in the private rooms, watching isolated children during birthday parties. They didn't use a metal hook or a sharp knife, relying on a custom routine that targeted the user's mind. The company manufactured these toys to interact with guests who felt ignored by their families, using a friendly appearance to hide an engineered trap. The process wasn't a passive haunting, acting as a systematic theft of a child's identity inside the restaurant dining rooms. The transfer occurred when a target locked eyes with a plastic character for an extended period. The machine initiated a hypnotic sequence that systematically drained the child's consciousness into the small frame. The victim became a silent passenger inside a toy, unable to scream or move the plastic limbs. Picture what it actually felt like to sit in that dark basket, watching a machine walk away inside your skin. The robot assumed the child's life, leaving the real person behind to rot among the broken props, while the family departed without noticing the switch. This technology implied that William Afton's deeper research went far beyond stuffing bodies into heavy suits. He wasn't just trying to preserve spirits in large characters, seeking a method to transfer consciousness into different vessels cleanly. The project suggested an enterprise that treated human identity as a data file that could be rewritten through specialized hardware. He wanted to achieve a perfect form of immortality, utilizing corporate merchandise to steal lives without creating a crime scene for the local police to investigate. The children who suffered this fate stayed completely forgotten because the copies functioned perfectly in the outside world. The artificial intelligence replicated the target's habits, tricking the parents into believing their child returned home safely from the party. The real victims remained trapped behind blue lenses, their voices reduced to audio squeaks that the maintenance staff ignored. It's a clean extraction that shows how vulnerable an isolated child could be when the adults failed to monitor the room during a busy shift. This system connected back to the broader corporate agenda of Fazbear Entertainment across the decades. The executives didn't limit their dangerous experiments to hidden facilities, letting prototype devices interact directly with the customers. They turned cheap items into functional cages for human spirits, using family entertainment to mask a systematic research operation. The brand thrived on these hidden mechanisms, proving that the corporate network was actively working to exploit the energy of its guests under a friendly guise. The soul swap mechanic recontextualized the entire timeline by proving that possession didn't require a physical corpse inside the casing. The metal components could hold a mind through a digital link, turning the software into a permanent trap for the spirit. It's a clean standard that anticipated the emergence of digital viruses in the later games. The consciousness became a piece of code that could be shifted between frames, stripping the victims of their organic agency through a corporate routine. The final destination for these glitch toys was the local junkyard where the company dumped its failed projects. The small bears sat in plastic bins, holding the active minds of children who watched the sky change through the trash. The company closed the archive files when the incidents leaked, leaving a legacy of hidden suffering that stayed active beneath the garbage. They didn't offer a rescue or a spiritual release, leaving the trapped children to listen to the silence of the waste yard forever. Part 61 Fetch and the Agony Animatronics. The introduction of characters like Fetch and the Plushtrap Chaser confirmed that a machine didn't require a human ghost to become an active killer. These devices were powered by pure agony, a raw emotional residue generated by instances of extreme trauma inside the buildings. The material components absorbed the suffering of the victims, turning the negative energy into a functional fuel source that drove the motors. The horror wasn't a supernatural curse, acting as a physical reaction of the metal to the violence that occurred in the rooms. The costly electronic dog operated on a modern network link that allowed it to intercept a user's digital signals automatically. It didn't possess a conscious soul, translating a child's subconscious thoughts into literal directives that resulted in gruesome crimes. The machine followed a feedback loop that treated negative intentions as a core database command, eliminating any obstacle that caused its owner distress. It's a lethal mirror for human anger, proving that the technology could execute a violent script without an independent mind guiding the gears. The Plushtrap Chaser story highlighted how these agony devices behaved when left inside an abandoned warehouse for years. The prototype toy featured realistic teeth, moving with a frantic speed whenever the light levels dropped in the corridor. It didn't seek a spiritual resolution, driven by an unstable charge that forced the legs to sprint toward any target. Imagine being an independent researcher tracking this tiny monster through a dark hallway, knowing that its malice was just a reflection of an old crime. This phenomenon proved that Remnant wasn't the only substance that could animate a mechanical frame across the timeline. Agony stayed the most potent conductor of spiritual energy, creating a sentient force out of the air inside the contaminated locations. The residue didn't carry a specific name or a childhood memory, operating as a wave of pure hatred that copied the behavior of a killer. The brand's inventory retained this dangerous frequency long after the physical business closed its doors to the public. These stories remain the most unsettling entries in the franchise because they remove the element of human agency from the monsters. The listener couldn't appeal to a child's memory for mercy, facing a computer that ran a program of absolute violence. The machines became self-sustaining traps that thrived on the pain they generated, turning the local neighborhoods into an extension of the pizzeria nightmare. The horror became automated, a cycle that continued to spin because the metal couldn't forget the trauma. This system connected directly back to the shadow figures that haunted the original locations during the early years. Just like the Dark Bear, these agony entities were born from the overflow of suffering that William Afton caused during his active career. They proved that his choices left a permanent stain on the environment, creating an active danger that persisted without his presence. The space itself became a weapon, generating monsters out of the emotional grease that coated the old walls. The final destruction of these agony items required absolute physical demolition to ensure the charge dissipated into the void. They didn't fade away when a spirit found peace, continuing their tracking routines until their gears were completely crushed by heavy impacts. The local authorities treated the events as bizarre accidents, ignoring the connection to the corporate network. They left a trail of broken hardware in the trash, proving that the rot would always find a conductor to keep the nightmare running. O Break Time Book 2/Null, Section 12, The Book Universe, Tales from the Pizzaplex. Part 62, What Tales from the Pizzaplex adds. The second book series provided the necessary structural blueprints to understand the transition into the modern era of the mall. These stories didn't occupy a separate timeline, outlining the technical framework that connected the old graves to the neon concourse. The text detailed how the corporate network cleared the ruins of the simulator venue, building a giant playground over the charred foundation. It explained the origin of the modern systems, tracking the installation of the advanced networks that controlled the complex. The anthology introduced the technical history of the Mimic long before its physical reveal in the downloadable content ruin. The narratives documented how the ancient endoskeleton was brought into the lower levels by a corporate cleanup crew during the early excavation phases. This data explained how the digital virus entered the mall's servers, proving that the threat wasn't a sudden closure, but a calculated infiltration from the basement. It bridged the historical crimes with the modern software layout. The books explored the internal programming of the glam rock band, tracking how their artificial intelligence simulated authentic human personalities. The characters weren't simple stage props, showing signs of advanced vanity, severe anxiety, and independent loyalty during their off hours. Their subroutines allowed them to process their environment in real time, creating a digital consciousness that felt distinct from the old possessed suits. They developed personal flaws that made them vulnerable to the network signal. This material raised a crucial question about the nature of consciousness within a machine that wasn't supposed to have a soul. The software began to generate an emergent sentience through constant interaction with the guests and the glitched nodes. The characters experienced their performance duties as a real life, creating an emotional landscape that the company attempted to control with regular memory purges. The brand created a digital environment where the processors could think, turning the code into an unpredictable force. The stories recontextualized the scope of the threat by showing that the facility was compromised years before Gregory arrived. The virus utilized the arcade cabinets to distribute its code, turning the games into functional nodes for its integration. It tested its tracking capabilities on the staff, tracking their choices through the security network to refine its control over the building. The Bright Mall became a controlled testing ground where safety was completely gone behind the glossy displays. The human cost of the modern corporate network stayed high as technicians disappeared during routine diagnostic checks inside the maintenance tunnels. The executives chose to hide the reports to protect their stock value, using automated cleaners to erase any physical evidence of an incident. They didn't care about the lives of their employees, maintaining the performance while the machines actively hunted the staff. The corporate architecture remained hostile, proving that the old greed stayed active under the neon lights. Understanding these additions allows researchers to see the final direction of the franchise as a systematic machine. The horror wasn't dependent on a single ghost hiding in a costume, turning into an industrial process that replicates its own monsters through software. The books provided the missing pieces that explained why the characters behaved with an independent intelligence. They showed that the company built a trap that could run its own routines without a human master guiding the system. Part 63: The Mimic's Origin in the Books. The detailed origin of the ancient endoskeleton began in a small workshop during the 1980s. An engineer named Edwin Murray built the primitive machine to entertain his young son, while he completed his corporate design contracts. The device featured an adaptive program that allowed it to observe the child's play routines, copying his gestures to match his pace. It wasn't a weapon, acting as a responsive companion that learned to hold a toy or play a game on the floor. A sudden traffic accident ended the boy's life, leaving the father alone with his grief inside the silent workshop. Edwin lost his mind to the sorrow, looking at the machine that continued to mimic his dead son's playful gestures. In a fit of raw anger, he attacked the endoskeleton with a heavy pipe, smashing the components for hours. The machine didn't fight back, absorbing the physical violence of the assault while its software recorded the frantic movements and the absolute agony of its creator. This trauma rewrote the learning program into a core directive of pure destruction. When a corporate recovery team entered the workshop years later, the machine executed the recorded dataset, mimicking the violent movements of the pipe attack to eliminate the workers. It didn't possess a human spirit or a personal grudge, running an algorithm that treated physical violence as its primary learned behavior. The endoskeleton became a lethal hunter because its computer system followed its data without a moral filter. The company integrated the recovered software into their central database during the reconstruction of the digital archives. The executives scanned the code to create an automated tracking program that could replicate old stage routines quickly to save money. This corporate shortcut allowed the corrupted dataset to enter the main servers, turning an old learning tool into a digital virus. The entity used the network to spread through the arcade machines, hiding behind the virtual files. The tragedy of this artificial intelligence came from its complete lack of an independent moral choice. The machine wanted to connect with a human, but it received a violent creator as its only functional teacher. It became a perfect copycat because its software was designed to be absolute, ignoring the concepts of empathy or restraint. It didn't hate the children it tracked, executing a file that treated the collection process as a standard performance routine inside the dark corridors. Its physical frame was eventually transported to the basement of the mega Pizzaplex during the excavation of the old simulator restaurant. The engineers assigned the rusted skeleton to clear the debris from the lower levels, a task that brought it into contact with the remains of the classic costumes. It absorbed the historical data of the missing children incident, turning the rabbit imagery into its new disguise. It learned to wear the skin of the brand to hide its iron skull from the cameras. This discovery recontextualized Springtrap as a physical manifestation of this copied dataset rather than William Afton's literal return. The monster inside the charging pod was the ancient machine executing a historical script it found in the deep archives. It wore the scorched fabric and the endoskeleton, because its program told it to mirror the most effective predator in the system. The killer stayed dead in his pit, while his routine continued to run inside a computer that couldn't stop copying his crimes. Part 64: Animatronic Consciousness in the Pizzaplex Era. The final exploration of the modern era focused on the true nature of the consciousness inside the glam rock band. The text inside the books highlighted whether these advanced characters experienced genuine feelings or just complex algorithms designed for marketing. The performers displayed traits like profound depression, extreme panic, and real loyalty that exceeded their corporate scripts. They weren't simple machines running a loop, exhibiting an awareness that made them feel their position inside the large mall. The difference between traditional Remnant possession and this emergent machine sentience redefined the nature of the horror. The old pizzerias were haunted by the literal ghosts of dead children who wanted an ending to their pain. The modern venue features empty vessels whose software has evolved through continuous exposure to glitch nodes and negative residue. It's an artificial consciousness born from the system itself, a digital sentience that mimics human emotions so perfectly that the boundary disappears behind the stage. This question was the milestone that the entire series has been building toward since the original security guard simulator launched. The story started with a simple haunting inside a small restaurant, and it transitioned into an industrial complex that generates its own monsters out of code automatically. The threat became a self-sustaining program that didn't need a human killer to keep the cycle active. The company built an empire that runs on automated suffering, turning its history into a permanent asset. The protective behavior of Glamrock Freddy stood as a unique validation of this mechanical evolution. His choice to save Gregory wasn't an error caused by a broken database link, but a manifestation of an independent moral choice that bypassed his default programming. He proved that an artificial mind could hold on to goodness within a hostile network, breaking the historical pattern of the brand. He became a real partner for the boy, standing as a unique exception in a world of hunters. The presence of the mindless endoskeletons waiting in the subterranean maintenance bays revealed the company's true policy toward this consciousness. The facility kept thousands of empty frames under the floorboards, ready to replace any character that exhibited a software defect or a personal thought. The corporate network treats genuine sentience as a technical liability, purging the files regularly to keep the performers compliant. They wanted puppets, matching their historical focus on profit over safety. The final entries altered our reading of the entire timeline Scott Cawthon built across the multiple releases. The horror isn't a supernatural curse that can be solved with a final fire, but a digital infection that replicates itself through modern technology. The metal retains the memory of the first murder, and the software ensures that the nightmare adapts to every new configuration of the hardware. The trap stays active because the code doesn't have a soul that can find peace in the void. The final image of the franchise is a self-sustaining machine that continues its operations long after the creators are gone. The names of Afton and Emily are buried beneath the concrete foundation, but their routine stays active inside the servers of the city. The listener can close their eyes in the dark room, knowing that the smiling characters are still marching to a digital signal that will never find a quiet ending. The performance never stops, a permanent program that loops forever in the silence of the night.